It's a new version.
Yeah.
It's from,
Okay, we,
Yeah,
everybody
it's
okay to start?
2022.
Yep.
it's new.
Good evening. It's 6:30, Monday, October 17th. I'd like to call to order the regular full BET meeting for October 2022. First item is a call to order and pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Our first item are two routine applications. And as they're routine applications, I'm going to ask the clerk to read off the items.
So it's PD2 from the Police Department in the amount of $217,000, an additional appropriation for overtime for the Police Department. And second, we have from Nathaniel Witherall, NW2, an additional appropriation of $13,000 for a chapel window replacement.
Okay. I'm just going to make one or two comments, and then I think we can proceed to a vote on this. The police department relates to school security. There have been many discussions throughout the community, and also at this BET at the previous meeting. This is a solution, and I think it's the preferred solution. I would also note, and I don't know if we have to make an amendment here, but on the cover page, it shows $217,000, but in the actual request page, the number is $271,000. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I believe the Budget Committee approved $271,000, so I'll make amendment to our agenda that this number be corrected to be $271,000.
Okay, I'll second that. Any objections? Okay. Okay, can we get a vote? Is this accepted by unanimous consent vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Item 3 is the assessor's report.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and fellow members of the BET. I'd like to present the assessor's report for October 2022. First of all, we're finalizing the real estate portion of the grand list. We have completed the review of all building permits and new construction out in town, and hopefully we will have that completed by the end of November. In addition, the personal property declarations were sent out to every business here in town. There are about 3,900 of them sent. This year, as well as the last couple of years, we are still trying to get as many business owners to apply electronically to file online. Last year, we had 751 filing online, so hopefully we'll be able to increase that number as well. One point I should note to you, we got the supplemental motor vehicle, and this year there were 10,370 motor vehicles on it so far. We may get additional motor vehicles, but that's down over 2,000 motor vehicles from last year. So we may not see as much value in the supplemental motor vehicle as well as the regular motor vehicle this year, but that's subject to, we'll see when that, we get the regular motor vehicle sometime in December. So we may not see an increase, or we may see a bit of a decrease on that depending upon the car situation, number of cars in town. Okay. Now, I also like to just clarify a couple points about the Greenwich Country Club. I know a few people had some questions about it in their purchase of 25 Dublin Road. Just so you know, when it comes to local property tax, it is not dependent upon how you file or what you're considered in the federal level. The only way you're entitled to exemption on the local level for property taxes is if you fall under the statute of 12-81 in the Connecticut state statutes. You have to specifically apply for it, and you have to fall under one of those requirements, subsections 1 through 18. So even though the Greenwich Country Club is considered a non-for-profit, they pay taxes. A lot of the non-for-profits in town do pay taxes. As a matter of fact, most of them do because they do not qualify under those statutes of 12-81. Okay? Anybody have any questions for me this evening?
So, Lauren, I think in some of your information, you did note that at least, 4 of our country clubs in town are valued in the, $40 to $50 million range, and they're in, our top, I don't know what that group is in, but
Top
certainly
50.
maybe top 40 or 50 taxpayers in the town. So I think just that additional clarification is that they are Greenwich Country Club and peer country clubs are very large taxpayers in this town.
4 of the country clubs are in our top 50 taxpayers. Okay.
Lauren,
I just wanted to follow up on your point about the vehicle registration. It seems like a really large decrease. I mean, is that typical? I mean,
No.
what's going,
No.
do you have any perspective on it at all?
I haven't looked at the motor vehicle makeup of the supplemental grand list yet. I haven't gotten it all. We just got the account from the Department of Motor Vehicles, Registry of Motor Vehicles. I don't know exactly what's going on. I don't know if there's just a lack of cars because the supplemental motor vehicle is basically anybody who registered a car from last October 1st through the end of September 2022. Those are just supplemental. We will then get our regular list, which is everybody who had a car registered as of October 1st, 2022. So it's hard to say. I don't know if there's just part of the supply chain issues as far as there's just not a lot of new cars available, so people just hung on to their old cars, but we will see when I get the regular list in December. Okay.
Lauren, I have a question. As you know, we're doing the budget guidelines tonight, so in terms of your sense about the motor vehicles and, the potential risks there, do you feel that is reflected in the numbers we're using right now, or?
I think you're fine with the numbers you're using right now. I don't, even if you did see a decrease of such, the motor vehicle and the personal property lists are by far not a great enough influence over the overall grand list to make you worry about that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I'll move that we accept the assessor's office, accept assessor's report.
I would second that.
Jeff Raymer, Leslie Torkington, Jeff Raymer seconds. Any objections?
Thank you.
That's accepted, 12-0-0. Thank you very much, Lauren. You might leave early enough that you'll hit rush hour traffic now.
No, I'll hit the ring.
Yes. Item 4 is our controller's report. Peter Minorski. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. A couple of comments before I open it up to questions. A month ago, I reported there was 4 vacancies in the finance department. Happily, one of the employees was out on family leave. She's back and doing well. The accounts payable supervisor came back. She left May 26th, and then she returned September 26th. The third vacancy is the assistant to the budget director, Roland Geiger. We went through the interview process. We interviewed a number of very good candidates. We made an offer, and he accepted, and he is planned to start November 9th, which is the middle of the week. The second set is the ARP update. I attached the spending each month so that you could review the activity. And it's starting to pick up. As of October 14th, we've spent over $11.466 million. We got our second tranche from the state. There's 4 tranches, 2 from the federal government and 2 from the state. So we've got the full $31.4 million, and we've got about a balance of 15.1 at September 30th, plus the 6.1 came after. It came October 3rd. And then finally, the annual audit ties into the internal audit. The growing receivable problem at Nathaniel Witherall has caught the attention of RSM, our outside annual auditors, and they contacted us. We had a remote call with the finance staff, the partner from RSM, and they requested some type of an analysis. They lasered zero-pointed into the June 30th number of the 10.1, and they want to know, they want some type of assurance if that number is collectible. If it's not collectible, how much of it's uncollectible. So coincidentally, and this ties into the internal audit section, we had a remote call scheduled for Friday of that week at 1:30, and we decided to hold a joint conference between RSM, the outside auditors, and CLA, Clifton Larson Allen, who we were looking at to do an internal audit of the billing and receivables at Nathaniel Witherall. The finance staff joined the two sets of auditors, and Harry Fisher also joined us at that meeting. We spoke to them, and we decided that there was an urgency to audit the June 30th number first, so that the auditors can have a uncollectible for the annual financial comprehensive report when they report to the audit committee in December, and then they report to the whole BET in December. As I stated at the audit committee, I put $500,000 as a non-collectible, which I felt was it was a low number. So they promised to turn around by the end of this week and give us a quote. 3 sets of quotes. The first quote is going to be a very limited scope to audit the June 30th outstanding receivable. They're also going to give us some type of a scope, an hourly rate in a scope of services for a audit of the billing and receivable process. What also came out of that, and I also had several conversations with Harry Fisher, and this morning I spoke with Larry Simon. During the Friday meeting, it came up that they would be interested if we outsourced of doing the billing and receivables. And when I spoke to Mr. Simon this morning, he was for it. As a matter of fact, on his own, he was looking at that option of outsourcing. The issue came up about what about the unions? Would they object? If you all recall, when I lost my internal auditor and I went through the lengthy process of trying to find an internal auditor for over a year, and we made 3 offers and we were all turned down, we were able to go out and outsource and get around that. Mr. Simon and Nathaniel Witherall is in the same situation where they're not capable to fill the full complement of 2.5, that's their number, of FTEs that you need to do the billing and receivable process. So as a result of that Friday meeting, we decided that they would also give us a quote for outsourcing. They have a back room of retired and former billing people that came on, and they do exclusively nursing homes. This is a section of CLA that you don't see every day at the audit committees. It's not the internal audit outsource people. I'll stop there, and I'm sure there's a question or two on the TNW, Nathaniel Witherall.
Stephen?
Given that this problem sort of popped up unexpectedly, did RSM express any concerns about whether there were questions about the robustness of our internal controls at TNW?
They did not get into the internal control issue yet. They haven't done any testing. However, they acknowledge from representations that we've made that the system is basically broken. And when I say broken, I mean that we had the billing clerk, the long-term billing clerk, leave in September of 2021. Let me go back. June 30th, 21, you had receivables of $4.8 million. September, the long-term billing clerk leaves, and then there's this rise. It goes from 4.8 to over $10 million.
I know those numbers.
And during the audit committee meetings, they've acknowledged that the system is basically broken down, where they're not capable of billing in a timely manner, and they're not capable of billing accurately. So the issue of internal control is obvious. It's there. There's a lack of it. And what they want to do to protect themselves is to put in a large enough uncollectible to recognize that fact. But we all know there's an internal control issue up there.
Okay, thank you, Pete.
Bill?
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, I guess from going from a $10 million receivable balance at the end of June to 11 today, the trend is still bad, right? It's getting worse, not better. Question, that uncollectible amount, whatever it is determined to be at June 30th, 2022. Let's say it's not 500,000, let's say it's some other number, like 2 million. That effect on earnings belongs in the 22 financial statements, does it not the 23s?
It definitely belongs in the 22 at June 30th. That's what's being audited.
Right.
But it's a spillover.
Sure, of course.
I mean, Roland and I recognized the severity of this problem in June. Okay, June is quite a while ago. And June 30th has been closed for quite a while ago. The receivables haven't been reduced. They've actually went up a little bit. And everybody's been aware of this. So the answer is both yes, 22, and a spillover to 23.
Sure. The reason it rises is because the Witherell has been indicating that they made $1 million this year, but aren't we saying this arithmetic is that could quickly become a loss of $1 million, depending on this delta change, right? I'm not asking you to judge on the number, but the change affects 22.
If it's deemed that these 2 million of the revenues are not collectible, yes, it will be a $2 million hit to the bottom line.
Yeah.
If you're writing off 2 million, it could be a $1 million loss, in other words.
Right, exactly. So, and last question. I know Tom Marion, we keep communicating with him to do gap financials for the Witherell. Did you finally get a proposal from him?
You know, actually, in August, I had this conversation with him, and he told me he said he's got a note on his door that he looks at every day from Bill Drake. And he simply, this was August, we overwhelmed him.
Okay.
We pulled him into this. He said in August he was going to get to it, he was going to call you. August is come and gone. But I don't think they would, I think they need him up here for other things.
Okay.
He does, beside the cost certification, he has been helping out with receivables.
Sure.
He actually, for the third year in a row, has been reconciled the matrix system, which is the billing receivable system, to Munis. So the long-winded answer is that he said in August that he was going to call you, but I guess he hasn't.
And we're being very patient with him, but is there anything we can do to help him on that? Like,
No, we've called in other people. We've called in CLA.
okay.
If I can expand a little bit, Larry
Yes.
is also, they're looking at outsourcing. They're looking at contacting other firms. They're looking at 3 quotes for outsourcing. I said, well, CLA is going to be one of them. He said, great. And he said he thinks he's got 2 other firms. They did an RFP for those that didn't attend the audit committee meeting. They've had Matrix since the contract was signed in 2004. The system is outdated. It was like our payroll system that we had through Munis that never got updated for years and years, and we went to ADP. They did an RFP. The Matrix did not bid on the job, so they're switching. So they're going away from Matrix to this other firm, and I don't recall, it's an acronym, what the system is. So they'll be running parallel systems like you do with any transformation, whether it's a payroll system or a billing system or whatever. I think they've got them stretched pretty thin.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I think it was Jeff and then Leslie.
So I want to understand if I can, Pete, I didn't follow all of what you said. So you're going to use CLA to do a narrow audit on the receivables. You're going to use CLA also for a little broader audit, but you're also thinking of using a CLA as an outside vendor to handle these billings. And I'm trying to figure out, should I be concerned about a conflict of interest there, or do I actually get the serendipity that as I bring them in to do, assuming I bring them into the billings, I've already given them some background from the audit work that they did. I'm worrying about whether or not we have a conflict of interest going to them in these 2 different roles.
Okay. That question was actually asked on Friday. Their specialist asked the CLA partner in charge of that section of auditing, Now, Jeff Ziplo, the guy you all know, the partner on our internal audit, the lady asked that specific question, is there a conflict with this firm? And she was told no. It said RSM has the annual audit. So that, in their minds, there is no conflict. But let me clarify just the three pieces you just said. The first piece that's pretty firm is we need to satisfy RSM's concerns about the June 30th number. That's a very limited scope, which we're going to get a quote. The second piece is not my call. That is the audit of the billing process and the receivable process. That has to go through the normal process as I do with the other audits, and I have to bring it to Harry's group, the audit committee. We need a scope of services and dollar amount. If they come in and say it's $100,000, we're probably not going to go down that road, and I just pulled that number out of the air. The third piece is they offered outsourced services, but they have to go through a process, which means that they be pitted against two other bidding firms. So the only one that's confirmed is the first piece, is the limited audit of the June 30th.
As a follow-up, if I can, just brief follow-up, I guess my concern is if they're pitching for the business to take over the opportunity to do the billing, is there an incentive there for them to find a problem or to give something a color of being more of a problem so as to sell their services for that third piece? I would like the narrow audit that they do to assist RSM to be bulletproof, so to speak, in the confidence that RSM has that they're getting good answers back from CLA. Even when we sit down at the audit committee and scope out the audit for the second piece, I want to be sure that I'm comfortable that I get good work from them, not just a sales talk or not just something which helps to promote them to be a bidder on that third project. I guess that's where my concern is. I haven't quite thought it through, but that's where my concern was, Pete. I'm going to leave that. I'm not looking for an answer. I'm going to just leave that in your lap for you to think about and discuss with others if you think it's appropriate.
Just a quick response is, it's my same concern, and don't forget, we approached them. They didn't approach us. We are the ones that were reaching out. And they're on, it's a level playing field. It's the least, the best responsive. Cost is not necessarily the answer sometime, but it's the one that can do the job, we feel. And there'll be a review process. We might even be invited in as far as helping the hiring of outsourcing the project.
Just before you go, Karen, I just got a clarification. The entity that would hire them for the outsourcing would be the Nathaniel Witherall Management and Board for the outsourcing? It wouldn't be the finance department.
We would be outside of the process. It would be, well, I don't know the answer to the hiring practices up there. For example, the executive director, the director of nurses, I don't know the process of who does the interviewing, and I don't know who the hiring agency is. It would be my guess that it would have to be the executive director would choose to outsource it based on consultation with the Human Resources Department. As far as who makes the decision, I would say that it's a combination of the board, Larry, and the executive director, and maybe one or two others.
Thank you. Karen? Oh. Oh.
So Pete, can I come back to your point about the audit, the June 30th, 2022 audit of Nathaniel Witherall? And you indicated that they'll be determining if there are additional losses in the receivables. So you mentioned fiscal year '23, but that will be shown, is it correct, as a additional loss to our Nathaniel Witherall prior year losses in our fiscal year '24 budget? That would be a risk to add additional?
It could be.
So that's,
You have $1,250,000 in there
Right.
based on current information. If it got worse, I don't think it's, I don't think they're going to come up with bad news. It's,
okay,
we right now, the loss, the biggest loss is the deferral of income. We've got a $6.8 million negative fund balance on a GAAP basis. We don't use that, okay? The reason we don't use that is the $10 million, they collected 4-point-something million dollars in 60 days, and they defer the rest. The $5 million deferral hits fund balance. We, meaning the BET and the town, uses the fund balance on a budgetary method right now. So if that 500 went to $1 million, it's on a GAAP basis. The only way we would be impacted in the '24 budget if for some reason they said that $2 million don't exist. In other words, it was double billings. I don't foresee this. I don't see that at this point impacting the budget, other than the $1,250,000 you have right now and you discuss later at the budget guidelines.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you. Karen?
Pete, I'm going to change the subject a little bit. Under your cash management section on the cash report, you indicated that $10.2 million has been asked by the state of Connecticut to be returned, and it was due to this Greenwich Public Schools business office incorrectly requesting reimbursements for 17 grants. Could you speak to that? That's the first I've heard about that.
It's ARP on the town side, $31.4 million. They gave it to us 2 Junes ago. There's the $9 million piece and a $6 million piece. One's from the federal, one's from the state. And then they repeated it this year. So they give us in advance. The grants on the other side are reimbursement grants, okay? In the case of the ESSER 1, 2, and 3, the $9.5 million, a clerical person was sitting at a computer and was requesting grant. It was either 8 or 9 grant reimbursements that amounted to $290,000. The clerical person inadvertently, instead of requesting the reimbursement, populated 16 grants with the amount of money that they were entitled to in total. So just to take the ESSER 3, they had already spent $1 million. There was a balance of slightly over $8 million, and there was no request for reimbursement at that point. Instead of not typing anything in or typing 0, they typed in $8 million. And they did that 17 times, and it amounted to the state giving us 10.5, and we were only entitled to 10.2. So right now, we've got 2 things going on. We've got my aggressive treasurer, who is very cybersecurity and very conscious of controlling the cash, the way it's spent, meaning wire transfers versus check. Requested 2 things. They wanted an explanation from the Board of Education as to why it happened and why it won't happen again. And the quick answer is that they're going to put a second set of eyes on the clerical input. The bigger issue is that the state of Connecticut is demanding a check. My treasurer is pushing back the state and saying, why can't we send a wire? They said, send a check. So at this point, they're demanding that we send a check to a P.O. box. And I guess, unless I go to the law department and ask for an opinion, I mean, I don't know what the risk is of sending a check. I told Harry Fisher the story back when we had BlackRock, was the fixed income people for the pension board, and they would get a check between $40,000 and $45,000 every quarter. And one time the check disappeared, and there was an investigation. It was stolen from a P.O. box in Manhattan. It was whitewashed. A new address was put in, and it showed up, and it was cashed in a Arizona credit union. I worked with the police department, the FBI, the Secret Service, and a whole bunch of people. I mean, that's the fear of sending a check out, that it could be stolen and disappear. So that's where we are with that issue.
Okay, do you know if the Board of Ed has actually discussed this or
No,
talked about it? And I was at least pleased to hear that there's going to be a change in the procedure, but, I guess there should be a procedure for input and for checking. So I'm was pleased to hear that that's going to happen.
It's somewhat unusual that there's no control on the other end. You know,
think?
just the magnitude of, we're going to give you $9.5 million, you've applied for it, and you've laid out the spending plan that involves 2 to 3 years, and all of a sudden you're asking for it in one entry. So I'm more curious about the controls at the state of Connecticut
Well,
side.
that's another story for another day.
Give me the website and I can
I would also suggest if you do a check that you send it FedEx with a signature.
Certified. No,
Or
yeah,
certified, or with a signature.
We're going to do, yes, we're going to do that.
It's actually Laura and then you, David, sorry.
So I wanted to go back to Nathaniel Witherall, just for completeness, Pete, can you just remind us that there is a firm that's been hired, I think on a temporary emergency basis, to try and collect the receivables that would otherwise age off? Can you just update us on that? And then secondly, am I understanding correctly that there was one bidder for the RFP for the new billing software, I think it was PCC, Point Click Care. And simultaneous with that, there's going to be another RFP to potentially outsource the billing. So we're talking about migrating from an old to a new billing software and outsourcing? I'm a little worried.
Let me answer the first two and then go back to the third one. I spoke with Larry. A&R is 2 people, and they've reduced their rates, and they're also going to provide training for $150 an hour, which CLA is also, they will provide that if we ask for it in the future. They are going only for, I think it's Medicare, Medicaid, and your term is age out. The ones that we're potentially going to lose, it's the potential is we lose them quickly, or we get somebody in there and pay them 15%. The second piece was yes, as I mentioned, Matrix did not bid on the RFP. There was only one bidder, and we took that. They took that bid, so that what they have to do is Matrix is in place. They have to run parallel systems until the new system comes on board and the old one goes away. It's similar to how we did ADP. We had to run 2 parallel systems. And I missed the
Well, I'm just a little bit concerned about the capacity to both migrate to a new billing system and to migrate to outsourcing the billing. So I'd be curious to get a project timeline, who's going to manage this? There's a lot going on up there. You don't have to answer that now.
I was actually going to put Harry on the spot, but it's actually a topic. It's a great question. It's a topic for November 1st, the audit committee. We're to Harry Fisher's credit, we're all over this. We've been on it. We would have been on this in August if there was meetings in August. Harry, you got involved, I think, in July, right?
I think it was August.
Yeah. So that'll be on the audit committee agenda.
So, just picking up on the issue of a potential conflict, it does seem to me that we should get Amina involved here. There's a basic rule that I'm familiar with that says, or a rule of thumb that says if your auditor should not be doing consulting services in addition because of the inherent conflict. This is a pretty established concept in the business world. And so I am a little concerned that if we outsource an activity to CLA, who's doing not just this audit, but a series of audits for us, whether that violates the whole notion of having an auditor also engaged in this is, why all these big 8, the original big 8 got out of the consulting business because the conflicts were too serious. And so I think it's something we should be very careful about and have Amina take a look at that and just make sure that those conflicts don't exist.
Can I have a quick response? I
Yes.
agree with you 100%, and that's why RSM will not take any assignments. What I'm saying is that that RSM will take that assignments. CLA are the consultants. Now, I understand that and they brought that up, so I agree with you, and it would be.
CLA is doing all they are our auditing firm. No, RSM.
internal
No,
audit.
no. The internal audits.
Yeah.
They're doing audits that we rely upon for determining that our financial controls are, up to snuff. They're doing audits. They're doing operational and process audits. So I'm not worried about RSM. They don't factor in, but CLA does.
I agree with you.
Can I just jump in here for a second? I think, by the way, I think this is a really good discussion. And I think, obviously, Peter is very open and receptive to this discussion and the input of the board. If it's okay, might I offer that this discussion happens at the audit committee? Is that okay?
Yeah, no.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. No, thanks everyone for their comments. They're excellent. I just know we have a lot to do, and I think that's the best place for it. Okay? All right.
So I move that we accept the controller's report.
I'll second that.
Okay. Leslie Tarkington, second Leslie Moriarty. Any objections? Thank you. That's accepted 12-0. Thank you very much, Peter. And I think now we have the treasurer's report.
The treasurer's report, I really covered, I covered the issue of the ARP money coming in after September 30th, the 6.1 million. Ms. Fasciolatis covered the issue about the 10.2 that we have to give back. It's noted in the controller's report. So I really don't have anything else to add, unless there's any questions on the treasurer's report.
Any questions? Okay. Can someone move the treasurer's report?
So moved.
Okay. Leslie Tarkington, Leslie Moriarty. Any objections? Okay, that's accepted 12-0. Thank you very much, Peter. The next item, we have two BET standing committee reports. Imagine on audit, some of it's already been covered, but
I would say that Pete did an excellent job of covering everything that I would have discussed, so I'm gonna defer unless anybody's got anything further.
okay, thank you. And I think HR, we're just going to, Bill's just going to update everyone on the study.
I think at HR, the key thing to know is that we're, as you could see from our last meeting agenda and discussion, the town is going to make an RFP for an external review of management and confidential salaries and full compensation, including benefits, just to be sure, which we do every decade or so, that those elements of compensation have external comparability to the market and internal coherence to other groups in town, which would also be the Board of Ed cabinet and the highest ranges of some of the unionized people. So that's underway, and you'll hear more another
Okay,
time.
so yeah, the HR committee did approve the RFP 400, and we'll just await the responses and then come back. Good.
Yes.
Yep, fantastic. Thank you, Bill. Okay. The next, I think we're to new business. And new business, the first item for new business is the state grant for $300,000 to the senior center, an update and first read. We have Amina Ahmad here. Thank you very much, town attorney. And I don't know, Karen, if you want to do a quick introduction to the item?
I'll let Amina go and then I'll fill in.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the BET. I'm here on the $300,000 grant from the State Department of Economic and Community Development for the Senior Center. We had gone to the Law Committee a month ago and back again last week with the closing documents that the town would be required to execute, enter into, in order to get this $300,000 grant, because there were some issues we wanted town officials like yourself to be aware of, and this is something which is also going to be presented to the Board of Selectmen and the RTM. I've provided the entire set of documents, but I'll highlight some of the key provisions which we wanted to bring to your attention. For the $300,000 grant for the senior center, the state requires what's known as a restrictive covenant as well as a negative pledge. And essentially what this is, under the restrictive covenant, is that we as a town would be agreeing for a period of 10 years to have that senior center building remain for the use of the senior center. And if it's used for any other purpose for that 10-year period, we would need written approval from the state of Connecticut to change the use. There's also what's known as a negative pledge agreement, which is part of this, and somewhat similar to the restrictive covenant language. The negative pledge says that if we, Town of Greenwich, either mortgage, pledge, encumber, lien, do any type of property transfer, including a lease at this building, for that, again, we would need approval from the state of Connecticut. Now, that negative pledge agreement does not have the 10-year restriction in it, so potentially it could be for a much longer time because the language here talks about for such time as we use the grant funds and are in compliance with various terms of the grant agreement, so that potentially, the way it reads, it's not just for a 10-year period. The other issue that we wanted to bring to your attention, which we've been dealing with, I think, more and more recently, is indemnification. So again, the state requires a pretty extensive indemnification agreement from the town. And finally, there is a very extensive environmental certificate that we have to sign off on, basically saying that there's never been any type of environmental issue with the property, no discharge, that we're in compliance with state, federal environmental laws and regulations. So it's pretty extensive in terms of what's required. So to address just that environmental piece, DPW is doing a phase 1 environmental study to see what comes up for the senior center building. My office has also is working with a title company to secure a certificate of title for the property, which is another requirement as part of the agreement documents. So those are just the highlights, and I'm sure Karen and Stephen may have something to add.
Karen?
Sure. I think, where we had the most discussion in the law department was on the need for approval for any leases. There are currently entities there that are leasing the facility, and if one of them were to go away and the senior center wanted to lease to another entity, they would first have to go to the state for approval. And I don't know if we have any history of whether or not the state has ever not approved somebody. So that was a lot of the discussion. On the environmental certificate as well, there was discussion as to, should we bind the town to something that we don't really know, which is the reason why for the phase 1 study is being done, and you're getting a title search done just to see if there's anything that comes out of it. I guess the question is, do we want to enter into this for $300,000 when it would restrict the property for 10 or more years under these restrictions that Amina has outlined? Now, this is not the only grant that's up for grabs as well. We had $500,000 for the Chimes building and $500,000 for the Round Hill Fire. That is privately owned, so they would have to deal with that. Although the town does contribute. And you said there was one more, but I can't remember what it was, but.
I think those are the three.
Those are the three?
Right.
So again, And we don't have any feedback yet from the Board of Selectmen, how they feel about it, or the RTM. So this is really a first read, and hopefully you'll have some input for us as you go to the other entities.
Yes, and I should also point out that I've spoken with the attorney representing the state. I said, look, we have all these issues. Can we work with you to try to amend some of the agreement language? And basically, I was told that in the last 2 or 3 years, he has done 300 of these grants with various entities, including municipalities, and no, they will not change anything. So it's essentially take it or leave it is the message.
Okay, Leslie?
So, Amina, we've done grants with the state before where we've stepped in between, such as the Bruce Museum. Have these grants been, as I remember, they've been approved by this board and so forth. Have there been similar restrictions or requirements on those, and we just haven't focused on the, whatever, I was going to say seriousness of these encumbrances that would result as a result of taking the money?
I can't say I'm familiar with the grant for the Bruce Museum, but the state, I know in the last few years, has really been looking at their own agreements and really tightening up some of this language. And I date myself here, but there were grants going back many years and contracts that we would enter into with the state where there was indemnification language. So perhaps this is also another way of answering your question, Leslie. And the state AG's office would let us amend that indemnity language to say, to the extent permitted by law. Because we told them, under our charter, we can't agree to this. And for many years, they used to let us do that. They would send us their form and say, just type in next to it, to the extent permitted by law, and that's okay. But after a point in time, they stopped doing that. They essentially said, no, we have gone back and taken a look at all our agreements, and this is what you need to sign. There's no wiggle room around what we're giving you.
I just remember it's not that many years ago, we did, I think, the Bruce Museum, Neighbor to Neighbor, the YWCA, and several like that. I just, I'd be curious, particularly as the Bruce Museum, which is always explained as our property, whether we had to do that negative pledge on
I
that
can
one.
certainly go back and take a look.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't recall a negative pledge. I do recall the indemnification, and I don't recall a restrictive covenant at all, but,
Yeah.
I could be mistaken, but.
Laura?
I was at the law committee, but I can't remember. Karen, can you refresh us? You did take a vote on this item, did you not? Did you report that?
No, we didn't.
No, I thought we did. No?
No, we didn't. We just,
Okay.
we said it was basically a first read.
Okay, then my second question is to Amina.
Yes.
So there was the Board of Selectmen accepted a gift last week, a very significant gift for the senior center, and my recollection is that the naming rights policy is that it's going to have to be in place for at least 15 years anyway, right? So I guess I'm a little less concerned about the restrictive covenant. I'm assuming that we're going to disclose at the outset that we have a subtenant in the Greenwich Arts Council. There may be additional subtenants under that lease, and I think that lease is also a pretty lengthy term. So I guess on the face of this doesn't really bother me for $300,000, for whatever it's worth.
Can I just add one thing, though? You have, an overall lease, but if any of those sub-lessees change, you would then have to go back to the state, from what I understand. So it's a fluid type of situation, and I don't know how many sub-lessees they have and what the terms are.
Well, that's my question. If
Yeah.
we say Greenwich Arts Council is the tenant.
Yes.
Does it go down another level to
Yes,
their subtenants?
They have sublet
Okay.
their space to, I forget, there's at least, I think, 2 perhaps, So yes, the language would cover any type of change in the leasing. And I did go back and take a look at the Arts Council lease. So that is scheduled to end in 2024. The current lease does not have an automatic renewal provision like most of our leases do, but I suspect we'll see the Arts Council wanting to come back and renew for another 10-year term. But as it is written now, does not have that written in.
Okay, and I know this is a first read, but is there a deadline by which time we need to make a decision on this? Have you gotten any guidance from the Senior Center or the Board of Selectmen? or-
There is no deadline. So when the package came to us from the state's attorney, basically they said, we want you to close in 30 days, is the note that came with it. So I spoke with the attorney, wrote back, and I said, look, this is not something we can do in 30 days. So the way it was explained to me is that they put out there just to get people to read the documents they send out, and that it's a very fluid type of a 30 days. But I've been in communication with him saying, here's the process, we're following, our process, and the response I've gotten back is, as long as you keep us apprised as to what you're doing, that's fine. And then in terms of any internal deadlines, we'll go to the Board of Selectmen. I'll try to get this on their agenda for their October 27th meeting, and we'll take it from there.
So one second, Stephen. I take that to mean that this would potentially be on our November BET meeting. Is that what you anticipate?
Sure, yes.
Anyway, just keep us updated so we can make
absolutely.
sure everyone gets their
Yes.
questions answered in a timely fashion. Stephen?
So, Amina, you've been quite clear that the state has been pretty inflexible in the language. So have you asked, and if you haven't, can you ask the state whether they've allowed entities like the senior center to enter into new leases? I think that's, one of the things I've heard from this panel this evening is that the leases and the subleases are a concern.
Right. I will ask that question.
Thank you.
Yes.
And just following up on Stephen's point, what would be the recourse? Let's say they determined that the sublessee was not appropriate. Is it automatically that the full amount of the grant needs to be returned to the state, or is there a process for trying to resolve this situation?
The agreement is not clear on what would happen if that is denied, but it does say if we do any change in leasing or if we encumber the property in any way, we need state approval. But that, again, is a question I can specifically ask when I ask the other question. And also, generally, I think what I've also heard is, if we ask for approval, how long does it take? Is it 1 month or 1 week? What's the process?
Nisha?
Just a real quick, I was going to have the same question as Leslie Moriarty. What's the recourse? But also kind of what's the spirit of the lease restriction? Is it that they don't want a specific, I mean, that they're coming at it from some angle. It's not that they're looking to block all lessees or, so is there a spirit of, lessee, thou must not be in a certain industry? For example, they might not want, gaming or, I don't know, right? What's the spirit of that restriction
Right.
that they're coming after?
That's a good question. I think the intent here is if they're giving $300,000 for a senior center, then that's what we're going to use it for renovations. And that we expect, we meaning state of Connecticut is saying we expect that for our $300,000, you're going to use it to renovate your senior center and keep it a senior center for that 10-year period and not, in 3 years' time, move the senior center out of there with the nice renovations that you've done with their money and put in restoration hardware or somebody else. So I think that might be the intent.
Okay. Thank you very much, Amina. I
Yes.
think does that cover us for today? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our second item on new business is the discussion and vote on the fiscal 24 BET budget guidelines. Just so everyone's aware, the guideline process has been going on for a few weeks. and the most recent version was posted on the website, I think this afternoon around 1:30, if anyone wants to review it. I believe all members here have a printed copy, received it by email, red line, and they also have a printed copy here. So that is the version that is before us. Yeah, oh yeah, it's about, yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, this item came before the Budget Committee. We had a first read last Wednesday, October 12th. The document was discussed at that time, and further modifications were necessary that came out of that discussion. So what is posted in addition to the text was also a new estimate.
Leslie, before you continue, since the vote was 2-2, it's technically not coming from a committee, so I think we have to move the item first, and then you can give your report.
Okay, so I move that this item, the
We have a second?
discussion of the fiscal '24 budget guidelines be put on our, be moved and put on the,
And I second.
okay? Thank you. So, those in favor?
Yes.
Did we say? Oh, did you say, did we vote on this? Do we have to
Well, no,
vote
it's
on
already
it?
on the agenda.
You can, I mean, you should continue with your report. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Okay. So, anyway, so also was placed was the summary estimate of the budget. So do you want to go through the detail? Would you like to have Mr. Geiger go through it? I think we, overall,
Can you just update them on the vote, too? There was a vote.
so that was put forth with additional detail before the Budget Committee meeting, which was held this morning at 9 a.m. After a lengthy discussion and various motions, the committee took a vote on the document itself, and the vote was 2-2, and the item failed to be moved to the BET meeting as such.
Thank you. Can we, any discussion?
At the appropriate time, I have two slight amendments to offer.
Okay.
To the current
And
document.
in terms of a quick summary of the document, Roland, do you want to do that? Should I? Or- Yeah, I mean, just a very brief summary. I think that was provided the budget. I mean, very brief.
Salaries for non-certified employees.
Microphone.
Salaries for non-certified employees was assumed to go up 2.3%. Certified was assumed to go up 4.36%. The other accounts in the operating budget are up 2.3%, which is consistent with the salaries. And some of the big items that changed were the utilities, which are up 54%. The other items are higher healthcare, 12%. And the pension contribution is based upon the actuarial valuation. And the contribution to Witherall is reduced because of what we thought was pretty good results at the end of the year. That's obviously subject to change as we get farther into the audit process. And the capital tax levy is up 1.5%. 1.5 million, yes.
Thank you. Okay, can I open it up to discussion? Leslie Moriarty.
Thank you. As a member of the Budget Committee, just to go on record that I did vote against these guidelines, and I wanted to identify why at this meeting to give all the members an understanding of my concerns. When it comes to, just generally, what these guidelines are moving towards is a shift to a much greater, tighter financial profile for the town departments, both in operating and capital. The goal here, as pretty clearly identified by using a challenge budget, is to slow the growth in the operating budget. And certainly I understand that we have inflation and that we have increase in healthcare costs and other operating expenses, which are, which increase our budget more than anybody would like it to be. However, I think we also have to remember that we are providing town services as our residents expect. They want us to do it in an efficient manner, but we need to have the right conversation in order to understand what the trade-offs are and the decisions that are being made to the level services. I want to remind this board that 2 years or 3 years ago in the fiscal '21 budget, we instituted a 0% increase on both town and Board of Educations. So we already did this 3 years ago of limiting the increases, even though we knew that salary and wage agreements would automatically increase the salary line, which is the largest expense of our town government. So now, 3 years later, we're not bringing it down to a 0% increase, but we are bringing the rate of the operating budget increase lower than what would normally be expected. Interestingly, also, when you look at Exhibit 1, and there's a factor of how much, a decision of how much we reduce the operating budget, we're doing it against a continuation budget, a level services budget, which Mr. Geiger just indicated what the wage increases are. There's an inflation assumption there. But the assumptions in that, I think, were also very aggressive. So the base that we're asking them to cut from is understated, which means that the amount of the reduction is actually going to be harder for them to hit. And then when you turn to capital, there's the effort to slow capital spending. And yet, over the past couple of years, there's been an identification that we're not maintaining our infrastructure, that our school buildings are not functioning the way they need to in a current educational environment, but we're not even investing at that level. We're just catching up to try to do ADA, which isn't really fully captured even in the proposals coming to us. And we are trying to follow through on some initiatives sort of planned or at least talked about in the public so our residents think about it, like the Hamel Rink, like our playing fields, which was a study that this board initiated, and we will have difficulty in moving ahead on some of those things with the capital forecasts in here. We also have been, for 3 years in a row, I think we have not funded a new fire truck. We know we have Western Middle School field remediation. So there are things coming at us, and yet there are numbers in this which I think are unrealistic to expect that we should be stopping work on those efforts to push things down the road. And it shows up in these guidelines in two ways. First, the amount indicated for fiscal '24 capital budget, $100 million, sounds like a big number. It is a big number, absolutely. But this board is committed to moving forward with a new school for Central Middle School, which is the majority of that forecast. And so you wonder, is enough maintenance being done? Secondly, there's a number in the guidelines of $400 million for 5 years. So that means if you take away the $100 million in fiscal '24, you're doing $75 million a year. Again, higher than we've done before, but construction costs are higher. We've delayed so many projects over the past 3 years that there is a backlog out there. And certainly last year's budget for that 5-year period was $580 million. So there's a significant reduction that we're seeing. And I'm not indicating that we, as a board, have the obligation to approve everything that's in front of us. That's not what I'm saying now. But we do have the board to have, I think we have the obligation to have the discussion and understanding of what we are doing and what we're not doing. And then one last factor, I hate to double back onto the capital, and this is a little bit of a detail, but because many people don't understand what the capital tax levy is, it's basically the amount of our taxes that we're allocating to pay for the capital projects. And if we know we have a backlog of capital projects, we should be responsible by increasing the amount that we're targeting towards paying off that future obligation. And our rate of increase in that is lower than what the formula had been in prior years, and certainly determined without a real look at what the impact is on being able to fund capital going forward. So I get that this is not an easy task. I get that, we're setting, but our goals are setting financial parameters at the start of the process without understanding what the trade-offs are as we go forward. So that was the general, those are the reasons I voted against these guidelines. I think they ask for some other good information, which we will benefit from. But on balance, I'm concerned about the message being sent. So at the right time, I am going to want to make some motions to approve some of those financial parameters in here and for the board members to consider those.
Thank you, Leslie. Any other Miriam?
Thank you. Just to piggyback off of what Ms. Moriarty just said, I think we all understand that this is going to be a very tough budget before us, partly due to the external forces over which we don't have much to say on, but also partly due to some of our board's actions over the last couple of years. I don't know when it's appropriate to also make a motion to some changes in some of this language, but it really gets to the point that Ms. Moriarty was just talking, is understand the challenge budget, understand that the numbers for level services in terms of the mill rate would be a relatively eye-opening, eye-watering potential number. But I think we need to understand what those trade-offs truly are, and not only for the potential for reduction of services, but also, and this has been a concern, I think, of a number of members on this board, what are the increased risks to our town that we take on when we decide not to do things? Mr. Chair, you let me know when it's appropriate to just make, suggest these small changes that I have to language, and I'll go ahead and do so.
Okay. Yes, Karen.
Sure. I'd just like to make some comments towards what Ms. Moriarty and also Miriam has said. We're looking at some challenging times. We can't continue planning this budget as though it's business as usual. Inflation is real. I was calling around today for my home heating oil, and I was appalled to find out that the price per gallon for me will be about $6 a gallon for oil. And it's predicted to rise above that. Our town is a diverse town, but not everyone is a millionaire. I know I'm not. So this is not the time to be really increasing taxes or conducting business as usual. In fact, some towns are actually cutting their budgets because they understand the challenges ahead. On capital, I heard some comments at the Budget Committee. The notion that we are underfunding our schools is simply ludicrous. First of all, the BOE spending has increased, but enrollment has decreased dramatically. And the argument that this enrollment is a temporary dip is a non-starter. In fact, the National Center for Education Statistics predicts a further decline of 7% in Connecticut public and elementary and secondary schools through 2030. Second, the schools received about $10 million in ARP and ESSER funds. The money is there for them to use. And third, this superintendent is paying her cabinet more than any town MC equivalents. And fourth, if you add health care and other benefits, the statement that we are underfunding our schools is even more untrue. With respect to capital, we have $170 million of open capital. The town and BOE have not been able to get to all the projects that we've already appropriated. 243 projects on the town side for $98.8 million, and 140 BOE schools projects for $72 million. So, they need to catch up on that too. The other thing is many towns are even deferring their construction, recognizing that the high cost of building supplies, and they're waiting for things to kind of level out or even decrease. So they're already deferring until these costs stabilize. So we cannot continue business as usual. And, I know what, I know what the comments will be, oh, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. But this is real, folks. This is real. It's affecting our pocketbooks. In fact, I had another conversation as I was calling around for gas, and the woman was complaining about the cost of food, and that, she can't even afford now to buy food. So, I just find it a little bit of a bubble to say that we should just continue on as though this is not impacting our residents. It is.
Before I take any more comments, just kind of a sense of the committee on how we want to do this. So first, obviously, everyone's going to have ample opportunity to provide comments on the guidelines in general, but I just want to get a sense, do we want to start disposing of some of the potential amendments, because some discussion may have happened then, and that way, if people feel they can miss something, then maybe they can make a final comment at the end. How do we want to handle this?
I think it's the chair's prerogative to make the decision. I mean, I see a logic to making the motions so that you, if I may, I see a logic to entertaining the motions and disposing of the motions so that you have what appears to be a final document before you, so that you don't end up with comments being redundant, first on the change and then on the item generally. But I think it's the chair's prerogative to control the group as you see fit.
Okay, so I see a few heads nodding, so I will take that prerogative if it's okay, and I will ask that we start taking these amendments. I think that so far, I think Karen and then Leslie Moriarty had said they were going to offer some, and I believe Miriam, are yours more wording, or is it other?
No, it's sort of a sense of the board.
Okay, so why don't we do that last then?
It's meat on the bones.
Okay, is that, we'll do that last then. So Karen volunteered first. Do you want to do yours? Thank you.
Sure. On page 3 of 6, under BOE facilities, I'm proposing after the first sentence that ends in schools enrollment, make that a comma, with a target for completion in the first quarter of fiscal year '24. So adding the line at the end of that sentence, the first sentence, comma, with a target for completion in the first quarter of fiscal year '24.
Do we have a second? I'll second it. Okay.
And
Karen?
the reason for the change is that, I have no doubt that a facility utilization study will be done, but it is open-ended, and sometimes I find that if we put into guidelines open-ended requests, they seem to get lost in the shuffle or they don't get done. So I'm just giving them a target date so that they understand that we do want this.
Be third quarter calendar year '23, with first quarter fiscal year '24.
First quarter, of fiscal year '24.
Right. So next July to September.
So it starts July, so 3 months into
Okay, great, thank you.
July, August, September.
Miriam?
Just a question, because this would be my first go-around at this kind of study. Who pays for this type of study? Is it typically the Board of Ed, or is it done because we're asking for it? Is it paid for out of the town, out of our board? Who doesn't?
We have some Board of Ed chairs here, former Board of Ed chairs.
Well, we're in a new world now where the BET is mandating projects, but typically this kind of project would be part of a Board of Ed responsibility.
Okay. And it is a target, so, yes, okay. Jeff?
Only that Ms. Vasiliotis said, referred to this as being a request, and I would have preferred to have seen the word request, but that isn't the word that's in the text. The text says the BOE is expected to develop, consistent with the theory that Ms. Vasiliotis put forward. Perhaps it could be said that the BOE is requested to develop, and then I would be more amenable to the requested date that's being proposed, as opposed to a mandate. No, it's not, actually. It's an item that's before us. It was not passed by the Budget Committee.
No, I understand that, but I wasn't involved in developing the first sentence. I'm just adding to it, so I would be curious to hear from the Budget Committee members as to how they arrived at that language.
They didn't arrive at that language.
It did come,
I think the language here is the Board of Ed is expected to develop
Yeah.
a facility utilization study. I think, to Karen's point, I think that, I mean, obviously, it's a fair debate to say whether it should say expected to or requested, but I think the idea of a study is already in the document would be how I would take that.
With the supporting
Right.
information.
Oh, okay. Okay. You want to vote, Nisha? I mean, do a vote, a roll call?
Sure. Okay, this is an amendment, as Ms. Fasciolotis has put forth in front of us. Harry, I'll start with you.
Yes.
Laura?
Yes.
Karen?
yes.
David?
No.
I'm a yes. Dan?
Yes.
Leslie Tarkington?
Yes.
Leslie Moriarty?
Yes.
Jeff Framer?
No.
Bill Drake?
Yes.
Miriam Cruiser?
Yes.
And Stephen? Passes 10-2.
0. Thank you.
Okay,
Karen,
and
did you have
I have
another?
a second amendment, and I emailed it to Roland just so that we can have it in front of us. This goes to page 4 of 6 under the American Rescue Plan and ESSER funding. And this would appear at the end of the paragraph after progress to date. I'll wait till everybody gets a copy.
Thank you.
Just thought it was easier to see it. So basically, again, this is, there's no action item here. We're just saying that they are increased accounting oversights, et cetera, and that we have a number of things that have no progress to date. So I'm suggesting that the Budget Committee and the BET expect a detailed plan for the initiation and completion of all appropriated projects under these programs to assure they will be completed within the prescribed time. And I think there's a typo there, but you get the idea.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Good. So Karen Fasciolotis, Leslie Tarkington, discussion?
Well, again, I'm just suggesting that there be an action item associated with this paragraph, and that's the reason for the
Thank you.
amendment.
Laura?
I think it's a fair point. I think that, actually, the Budget Committee will be very focused on this on a monthly basis. We haven't really started that to date, given that it's October and the funds were available, we just appropriated them during the budget cycle last time. But I think it's a fair point. I just don't know if we need the language in the budget guidelines. I think that's going to be part of our workflow anyway.
Any other discussion? Leslie?
I would like to add here that it certainly is the intention that these projects will be tracked probably more closely even than the normal town projects are tracked. So I agree with Laura on that point. I also would support this only if this language was narrowed, because this town, what we on the BET and the Budget Committee can manage or get information on are these projects when they are BOE or town projects. But also there have been funds that have been delivered to other 501c3s and entities, and that would be very difficult. Though I think those that were done under programs from the First Selectman, Human Services, et cetera, under separate RFPs. So again, while there's a good spirit with this, I think part of this tracking process, this language would have to be greatly narrowed.
Can I?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, Karen.
Can on that note, would you be willing to say of all appropriated projects under the town and BEOE programs instead of these programs?
And this is for ARP, correct?
Yeah, this is still under the same
Correct.
ARP and ESSER funding.
Under the town, I'm sorry, Karen, could you just, under the
The
town?
Budget Committee and BET expect a detailed plan for the initiation and completion of all appropriated projects under the town and BOE programs to assure that they will be completed within the prescribed time.
I have, she said that. I have a modification to consider because some of the town projects, they're not capital projects. They are allocations to individual entities. And if we look at the sheet that's in our controller's report on the town side, almost all have been encumbered already. I think that we don't need to, I don't know what information we're really going to get on the non-capital type projects. So if I could support this with, and I'll make my one other comment, but if it may make more sense to limit it to the capital types of projects.
That's fine.
And so, but and like I said, I will support this, but I think we might be able to get pretty good information on initiation. I think detailed plan on completion is not typically always within the control and known as people move forward with these projects. So we'll get a point in time this month, but as both Laura and Leslie pointed out, this is something that we're all going to be following at the Budget Committee, and Pete's included it in his controller's report, so the full BET also will be seeing the data.
Okay, so,
Can I make another suggestion then, just based on that, Leslie? Expect a detailed plan for the initiation, excuse me, my throat all of a sudden got dry, and completion where available of all appropriated capital projects under the town and BOE.
Leslie?
Rather than, may I talk through you together? Rather than completion, should just be the timeframe for project process or something, you know, I think, I mean,
But estimated.
estimated completion, how about that?
That's why
All
I'm,
appropriate capital.
And just to create an overall context as to why we're spending so much time on this tonight, the ARP money has to be appropriated by, I believe, the end of 2024, which it has been, and it then has to be spent by December 2026. This can particularly be an issue for drainage, sewer, other kind of projects that can take a long time. So it is really critical that we stay on top of
I
those.
think you meant encumbered, not appropriated.
Oh, I'm
by
sorry,
20.
yes, encumbered, yeah.
that's fine.
Okay,
But
great.
also, just adding to your comments.
I didn't want to edit anything, I just
No,
wanted to.
I just
give a
wanted to
context.
say that it's not only the number of projects, there are 28 projects, and they total over $29 million. So it's a substantial amount of money in our capital program.
Okay, so, I mean, I will support Karen's motion with the edits from Leslie Moriarty and Leslie Tarkington. Do we want to have any more discussion? Do we want to call the question?
Can we just read it again so that
Yes.
everybody understands what they're voting?
Yes.
You want me to read it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, I had a coughing
Yep.
fit and I wasn't following.
Okay, let me read it as I have it. The Budget Committee and the BET expect a detailed plan for the initiation and estimated completion when available of all appropriated capital projects under the town and BOE programs to ensure that they will be completed within the prescribed time. Does that sound right?
That does. Great. Can we do a roll call vote?
Yep. Stephen, I'll start with you. Miriam?
Yes.
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 Yes?
Yes.
I'm a yes. David?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Laura?
Yes.
And Harry?
Yes.
It's 12, passes 12-0.
Okay, I think, Leslie Moriarty, I think you mentioned you were going to offer some amendments?
Yes.
Thank you.
I have a few, if you will all bear with me. My first motion, or to amend the guidelines, is to modify the fiscal '24 capital budget number to $125 million. And I'll explain.
Is there a second?
Just a second.
Sorry. Thank you.
My rationale, if I may, is I know that we all hope we can build a new central middle school with as little funding as possible, and the $100 million assumes a $68 million cost for that construction and site work and all-in expenses to get that building up and going. And there is information being presented at the Board of Ed meeting on this Thursday that their current assumption for that all-in cost is closer to $85 million than 68 million. And while we will have scrutiny and discussions over what the right number is when we do our budget together, I think we do need to signal that there is room in the capital budget to accommodate Central, plus our required maintenance and GHS remediation. And if we stick to 100 million and Central Middle School climbs, I'm concerned that we will have indicated to the Office of the First Selectman, or I should say the First Selectman, that he has to do more cutting of capital than I think we'd be comfortable with, because I think doing basic maintenance is very important.
Thank you. Any discussion? Nisha?
Yep.
And then,
I don't think there's a second.
Oh, it was seconded. By Steve.
Okay, so I just wanted to reiterate this. So this amendment was proposed this morning at the Budget Committee and did not pass. I voted against this amendment, and I'll just restate one of the, well, a couple of reasons of why I think this number is premature. First, the Central Middle, I am the BET representative on the Central Middle School Building Committee, and we are right now in the stage of hiring the owner's rep, but we have not even brought on an architect. So to escalate this project from the initial proposed budget of 67 million to 84, 85 million, whatever the Board of Ed has said, is extremely premature. But second, one of the, and we've had this discussion in our building committee as well, as to the scope of this project. This building project currently is being, we feel, or I feel, is being built larger than necessary, larger scope than is defined. So the enrollment targets for Central Middle are circa, for the next decade, somewhere between 450 to 500, with a maximum of somewhere around 510, 511. So based on that enrollment number, the size of the school should be considerably smaller. We're building, the current ed specs have the school spec to be 660 students. From a square footage standpoint, the state provides some guidelines based on enrollment number, what they feel the size of this school should be. And the way the state models their prescription is based upon the number of enrollment or the maximum enrollment over the next decade, and they prescribe square foot per child, kind of back of the envelope maximum. And for middle schools, that's roughly about 150 square foot per child. So for a 500 student body, that's somewhere around 75, 80,000 square feet. For 550, it's a little bit larger. The Board of Ed has proposed a school 115,000 square feet, a little bit larger. So from an enrollment standpoint, this school is about 30% larger. And from a square footage standpoint, it's about 40 to 50% larger. So bottom line, the scope of this project is much larger than it needs to be. The budget, the preliminary budget, which really is confidential at this point, so I'm not sure where the 85 million came from, but looks like somebody has leaked it, but it's out there. But that particular number is based upon, again, a 30% larger scope or a 40% larger size, however you want to look at it. So I do have very high level of confidence that we can get this project within budget if we can resize this project to get within scope. So the reason I voted against this in the Budget Committee and will not support it today, again, this evening, is simply because I think it's very premature.
Miriam?
So I will be supporting Ms. Moriarty's motion, and partly because I think probably a number of us followed the Board of Ed discussion over these ed specs throughout the summer. They were actually very debated and discussed. And not only that, I think not only did this board have the opportunity to speak to the firm that was responsible for creating the ed specs, I think we were all invited individually to join their numerous Zoom calls and meetings, but the community was asked to contribute as well, and there were a number of community meetings. So the ed specs, I think, at least at this point, are where they are after a relatively, a fairly thorough process. The Board of Ed, with all of those discussions with the firm, with their ongoing debates, and I believe it ended up being a vote of 6-0 with two of their members not being there. I mean, it was unanimous vote for 115,000 square feet. If you view the fact that costs are now probably about 20% above where they were, I think Dr. Jones kind of created a back of the envelope number. Just those two variables, the debated, very much debated ed specs coming out at 115,000 square feet, and the fact that prices went up 20% since we've all been discussing this, the number that has been released in what I believe is the Board of Ed's agenda as one of the exhibits for their Thursday night meeting is that 85, I believe it's 85.5 million. So it doesn't seem unreasonable. And so I think to have this discussion, knowing all this information already, but pretending we don't see those numbers, does not do these guidelines any good. So I'll be supporting Ms. Moriarty's motion.
I think Laura and then Karen.
I think this is a critical point that we should zero in on as a BET, because in this particular case, all of us have said we support the urgency of getting Central Middle School rebuilt. We're actually under some time pressure. We have some emergency repairs that were done that have a limited time horizon, not immediate time pressure, but 5 years, let's say, we want to get this building built. And I think there is a difference of saying the building at 115,000 square feet, there's been a cost escalation because it's now gone from 600 square feet to estimated 700 square feet, which accounts for the difference, versus another message that I'm hearing. And I have to say, Nisha, I respect you for your honesty. You're being very clear about, where you stand on this point, and I think it's important because we need to send the signal. Are we saying to the Board of Ed, there was a sentence that was added after our meeting today and in tonight's draft, that we're going to continue this important discussion topic? Or are we saying, Board of Ed, you need to go back and look at your scope, given the information on enrollment, on costs, and these budget guidelines? And I think in order to avoid the situation that we had with JC, where the events that transpired cost us 3 years, we need to just be very clear and very honest. This is one of those trade-offs. So I would be really interested in hearing perhaps from other members of colleagues across the aisle about how you're viewing this particular project, because, again, it's time to be clear and honest.
Thank you. I'll maybe jump in a little bit there. As you noted, we did add some kind of clarifying language to the document on this point. It's at the top of page 2. This is a very complicated, difficult conversation. I think everyone here is committed that we're going to build a Central Middle School, and the goal is to fund it in fiscal '24. I think that's clear. And obviously, we do not want to go through a JC process again, okay? And I think the good news here is I think we're well advanced versus a JC situation. I think in JC, there was a fundamental, disagreement as to whether or not a full and significant renovation should be done, or it should be focused on HVAC, security, and ADA. I think in this one, there's a consensus that there's going to be a new school. So don't get me wrong, we have to make sure we don't get a JC situation, but I think we're starting here in at least a better, I think in a much better place. So how do I think about the numbers, right? This 100 million versus the 125 versus the 67.5 versus the 85.5. The way I look at it is, going back to last year, we got a number of 70 million from the superintendent. I think we as a board, and I think frankly the RTM as well, when they approved the $2.5 million, I think we all said that we're on board for that. Now, even back then, there were discussions that, construction costs were, volatile and unknown and, with that, kind of upside risk and cost. I mean, I think even back then, there was an understanding that this was not going to be an easy process. So, kind of the way I see it is that to avoid a J situation, what we can't do is wait till February, March, and April when, we get a number put on our lap and it's basically, this is the number, there's no discussion, and take it or leave it, right? And then I think the way to avoid that is to, what we said here is to be having significant conversations. For example, we all going to have somewhat different value judgments, but let's just change the scenario a little bit, right? Suppose the number came in at 120. Would we want to have a conversation and say, look, we'd like to supersize the school a little bit, but now it's really, going to get to a number that's just so high, it's really going to take away a ton of other stuff, right? Now, maybe some people might think that 85 doesn't get to that level, and people are like, you know what? I expected some cost overruns, and I'm okay with 85, and I can live with that. Others might feel that number's in the mid-70s or some other place. But the fact is, we do need to be having a conversation. For example, it's not our job to create ed specs, but if a project goes over the initial projection, I think there should be a conversation, and it should happen now, and it should be open and productive. There may be things that are a little less necessary or a little more necessary. We all have to think about that. I think throughout that period of time, the BET should be signaling, not wait till April. Look, can we, maybe live with the cost overrun, and if so, how much, right? I mean, these are conversations we need to be having over the next couple of months. I don't feel today, besides discussing a framework, that I have a view on whether or not we should be going from 70 to 85 because I haven't seen any of the information. The last thing I'll say is about this 100 number, right? Because the 100 is based upon 67.5 Central Middle School. I mean, I'll speak for myself. If there's, look, there's certain cost overruns that are so high that, you have to make a gut check decision. But if there's a cost overrun and we end up having to do 108 million of capital when we finally get a firm number on Central Middle School, I mean, I'm just picking a number. I am not personally wedded to that 100 number. Okay, we've seen guidelines in the past where things came in under guidelines, at guidelines, slightly over. We know we need to get this school done. As much as I'd like to say that I'll never move from 100, I don't think that's a credible statement, because ultimately, this is a very unique year where we have one project that's, pick a number, 70% of the budget, and it's a project that we are trying to sort out in record time. I mean, this is going to be a real-time, continuous kind of discussion situation. Otherwise, we're not going to get this done. And then I do think, just talking to members of this board, and I've had some conversation with the Board of Ed and others, I think people understand that. But what we all have to be open to is we may have to provide some opinion on scope if it really does get out of control. And the Board of Ed may have to say, look, we thought it was 70, but it can't be 70. I mean, but those are, I think if we're not both willing to have that conversation and entertain each other's opinions, we're not going to get this done. So that's where I am personally. But I'll open it up to others. Thank you.
So for me, again, at this point in time, I'm not willing to increase this number, although, I've been listening to all parties. I think there's really two different aspects here when we're talking about Central Middle School. One of them really almost falls under the section of the BOE facilities. The BOE is expected to develop a facility utilization study given the decline in schools enrollment. And what we see in Central Middle School was a school planned for a substantially larger enrollment than is currently present in the school today, around 511, we'll say. And so, I'm sorry?
508.
Is the new numbers out today?
Well, that's the number I got.
Yeah, that's the new number today.
That's the new number today. Okay, so I was a little high, and, but not very much. So I think that it falls under this facility utilization study. What I have not been able to understand is that the BOE has really done 3 studies that would impact the enrollment of the size of the school, including, their overall capital plan, I think it was 18, an additional overall school enrollment study by Prouder, and I think it was April 1 of this year, a study for enrollment for Central Middle School, considering all the feeder schools that would feed into Central Middle School. And in that study, it basically projected student enrollment over the next decade of 453. So substantially down from our 508 of today. So I think that's one aspect, and that is, what is the right size for the school in terms of students. If we know for the next decade that school is not going to need it to be substantially larger. The other, to me, is the market prices for construction and any change. And I think this board and the Budget Committee, at least 3 times in this calendar year, 2022, has increased our appropriations, our commitment to ongoing projects because of when they went out to bid, construction prices were substantially higher than had been budgeted or forecasted. In all cases, we very strongly supported moving forward and having that additional increase, which I believe was around 25% for for the Eastern Greenwich Civic Center, for the Senior Center, and also for the GEMS building. So for me, there's 2 different things. What size student enrollment and body are we building this middle school for when we're seeing the enrollment declining, not only here, but elsewhere? And and then the construction costs, which I think, can be market today, but I do believe that, we can see escalation, or maybe we'll see a recession and we'll see prices go down. That's harder to predict, and I think that we will adapt our budget for those market prices when they occur.
Any other discussion? Okay, Jeff, and then Nisha.
So the comment was made that we don't want to see the school board come to us in the spring with an $85 million number or a high number on a take-it-or-leave-it basis, and that to fix a number at $85 million today is premature. Surely the request of what they think is needed, that prerogative stands in the first instance with the school board. The BET, however, are the financial shepherds of the town, and the what can we afford, that really rests with the BET. Sure, maybe it's premature to say whether the number should be 85 or 67, but just as we don't be told in the spring, here's the number, it's 85, take it or leave it, others don't want to be told the number is 67 and a half, take it or leave it. The real problem here is that very correctly people have said there needs to be a dialogue, and the dialogue has never been undertaken. And unfortunately, the way these guidelines were handled, there was not much opportunity for dialogue with anyone. And now we're looking at text which undiplomatically picks as a fiat one particular number. What really needs to happen here, what really needed to happen here, was this whole passage could have been more dexterously written to lay out that the figure is going to be determined in a healthy dialogue back and forth between the financial shepherds and the shepherds of the school system, and not be looking at a sentence which is imposing a dollar figure which is intolerable to half this board, or another dollar figure which is intolerable to the other half. We should have been more diplomatic to have dealt with this, which is the problem when you develop guidelines without having had the dialogue either with the party across the aisle or with the school board people, and that's the misfortune that we're in today.
Thank you. And, okay. Oh, Nisha.
So, I agree with my colleague, Mr. Raymer, that I think we should have had a better dialogue. I think, perhaps when, the Board of Ed was putting together these ed specs, it would have been, maybe it would have made sense to have a BT member as a liaison invited to those discussions, just so we could help think through budget while these were being decided. But I think, if we think about solutions and, what would be a way to move this project forward without getting stuck on whether the number is 60, 70, 80, 90, some numbers we've seen are 100, is to maybe perhaps think about, building ed specs around, whether it's 80,000 square feet, whatever we feel is the appropriate size with an expansion possibility. So what I would have liked to have seen in the ed specs is, right, this is what the school would look like at 80, 90,000 square feet, and, with a 20% expansion possibility if indeed the enrollment numbers are different. We know over the next decade, this school is predicted to be below 500 students. So the idea that we're going to build for 660 students just doesn't make any sense. And I do want to point out, just in the environmental world that we live in, we're looking to be more green, we're looking for sustainability. Capacity utilization is key. We have to make sure our schools are well utilized. Underutilizing these schools is really just bad for the environment. And then second, talking about construction prices, where we are today in the economy, with interest rates where they are, we are not going to break ground on this project another 2 years from now. It could be very well that, and where I think it would be, is that a lot of these prices are going to come down significantly. Steel, lumber, all of those things have collapsed. If you remember a similar discussion our board had in January when we were locking in prices for Eastern Greenwich, and I think I was the sole member on this board that did not support that project because I was very clear that steel was not a commodity that was by any means supply constrained. So why are we in that project? I think we paid an extra $2 million for that because we locked in prices of steel at the top. So the idea we're going to lock in prices today, because what we do is when we say we want $85 million, we anchor our projects right off. When we say 85, that's what we're going to start building towards. We're never going to get lower. Listen, I'm totally realistic. If we have a scope of a project and we hit economic climates where these costs go up, then we should revisit it. But the idea that we're going to build in a cost today and put in the maximum price for the largest school possible doesn't make any sense. So I would, if there are Board of Ed members listening, if there's open to discussion, I would think about revising these ed specs down with an option to expand if the enrollment numbers were to change.
Thank you. Are we ready for a vote? Okay. Nisha?
Okay, so we are voting on Ms. Moriarty's amendment to modify the capital to
125.
125. Harry, I'll start with you.
No.
Laura?
Yes.
Karen?
No.
David?
Yes.
A no. Dan?
No.
Leslie Tarkington?
No.
Leslie Moriarty?
Yes.
Jeff Raymer?
Yes.
No.
Bill Drake, no.
Yes.
Miriam is a yes, and Stephen?
Yes.
That's 6-6.
Thank you. 6-6, the motion fails. Leslie, do you have a?
Okay, next one.
Okay.
And maybe this one will be quicker, I don't know. The capital tax levy, as included in Exhibit 1, right now, it's proposed to increase 1.5 million. I want to go back to what the the BET's approach to capital tax levy had been in the past, which is to target a $3 million increase. In this period of time where we know we have an increasing
So
capital budget.
Leslie, I'm sure you have a second.
Oh,
I just want to make.
second.
Okay, Jeff Raymond,
Sorry.
thank you.
Thank you. So in this period of time where we know construction costs are increasing, the capital tax levy is really increasing to pay the debt service. So it's looking forward. It's looking really 2 to 7 years out for the projects you're approving in the current year. So we have to look at that capital budget. And while we're deferring a lot of projects as proposed, though that's my next amendment, I think we would be in much better position to be able to meet our infrastructure needs. At this planning stage, we're not making decisions on the budget today, but what we're signaling is what we think we may need to do to support some future decisions. So I believe that the capital tax levy should be represented at 3 million in this estimate, Exhibit 1.
Okay. Okay, discussion, Leslie?
So we actually, in the estimate presented last Wednesday, there were no additional funds dedicated to capital tax levy. In a spirit of working with our friends across the aisle, we increased that to $1.5 million. So, I do think that, but I would also add that in addition to that, we have seen the transfer of projects from capital to operating, and that's approximately $7 million of projects. We've seen the advantage of having the ESSER and ARP projects, which Ms. Fasciolotis talked about earlier. That's relieved this budget of another $29 million of capital because they're financed elsewhere. So I do think that this is something that we continue to watch. We need to continue to watch how much our debt issuance. It's my understanding that when we issue debt in next January and the following January, it's going to be approximately the same level as it is now. So I think that continuing to look at the increases, I think it's time to review it and get a better handle, even in February, March, during our discussions, whether any additional is needed at this point in time.
Thank you. Are we ready for a vote? Okay. Nisha?
Stephen, I'll start with you.
Yes.
Marianne?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Dan's a no.
I'm a no. David Weisberg?
Yes.
Karen?
No.
Laura?
Yes.
No.
Leslie?
Two more, sorry. I'm
Okay,
going to
no,
make this
don't be,
quickly.
don't
but
don't be
I
sorry,
think
you're
it's
making motions. It's like-
appropriate for the consideration for the full board to hear some of these concerns. My next amendment is to raise the 5-year capital number that's highlighted in the text from 400 million to 475 million.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
So my rationale here is we had a capital budget in the fiscal '23 budget that showed for the next 5 years, it's $580 million approximately. Now, we know some things have happened. We know that ARPA took some, actually, no, that already excluded the ARPA funds. And then there are other projects that we have heard will either not have support by the department that had put it in their forecast or by this board. So I can see that that number declines a little bit, but not down to 400 million. I've looked through that capital plan. I know that everyone's, or the people proposing that number have looked through the capital plan too, so we're coming out in a different place. But I think it's a pretty draconian number, especially since construction costs are going to be higher. We haven't bought a fire truck in 3 years. We're not going to do the Fields projects. Northwest Fire Station is going to be off the table. Renovating Sound Beach Firehouse will be off the table. We know that we have to fund Western Middle School's remediation, and that hasn't been fully funded yet. Our maintenance for our operating facilities, and that number varies a little bit every year, but it's getting close to $40 million a year just for maintenance projects. So Hamel Rink, the school projects, Old Greenwich was next, plus more money in JC. I think there's a list of things clearly as the plans roll out and the departments change their numbers. There'll be, some of those projects may drop in, some may be dropping out. But at $400 million that we've asked the first selectman to prepare a capital budget at that level, either it's going to create a capital budget of $1 billion after that, or we're just going to, as Miriam said before so appropriately, what risk are we taking on by not doing some of these projects? And I think the guidance at $400 million is setting too low a target for what the town needs in terms of capital.
Okay, I'll make a couple comments also to put some context. This 5-year guidance is something new. It really came out of discussions that, kind of based on what Leslie mentioned. Right now in our capital plan, our 15-year capital plan, if a project is not approved, it's moved over to the next year, and these keep rolling up. It creates a very lumpy plan. I believe in this year, it's like $218 million for fiscal '24. This town has never approved anything more than $92 million we did last year. So there was certainly a need to have better planning, and the reason for the better planning is that it not only helps a finance board think about, what we can spend over time and how we're going to fund it, but it's also critical for the departments and the community to have an understanding of what people can expect. It doesn't make sense for departments to put together proposals that, are not funded. It takes time, energy. It's obviously, as Leslie mentioned, it's important for the community to have an honest sense of what is coming and what isn't coming. I'm certain, when I thought about the 400 number, I acknowledge that, I'm sure you have 12 people in this room and you could have 12 legitimate views on what it should be. When I thought about the 400 number, I basically, I looked both at obviously the list of requests, but also kind of our historic spending and also the fact that after this year, we will have moved almost $10 million a year into operating from capital. So, that 400 really would represent over that period of time, $450 million of capital spending from a historical perspective, which is, 90 a year, which would be by far the biggest capital program in Greenwich history. So, I'm very comfortable that the 400 number represents significant progress. I mean, I certainly acknowledge that, there are people that might want it lower or higher. I appreciate that. I just want to put out one thing. I mean, I don't think this would be successful, but I'll just ask. If it made people more comfortable and both caucuses were there, I'd be willing to have a discussion about a somewhat higher number, but I'm not anywhere close to 475. So, and I think, we've had that discussion. I think maybe for this year, we probably just leave it where it is. And, or at least that's how I'm going to vote. And then, because one thing we also don't know is what, how Ben Branyan and Fred are going to process this information, right? This is the first year, and we're going to see the results of what they come back with. And I think over time, the BET will be voting on this hopefully again next year. I think this should be a part of the process. But I do think, even if we don't have consensus, I think it's a good start. So those are my comments. Karen?
I'm not going to support this. I'm of the opinion, quite frankly, with 243 town projects totaling $98.8 million and 140 BOE school projects totaling $72 million in open capital, I can't even see how new projects are going to get done when we haven't even been able to complete the ones we've already appropriated and presumably funded. So I'm not for raising this to above 400 at this point in time.
Jeff?
So it's worth mentioning, I think, that 6 months ago, last April, we voted a budget. Every Republican sitting at this table voted in favor of that budget. That budget attached a capital model. That capital model, admittedly, is sort of an amalgamation of a bit of a wish list from all the departments, many in which they are putting forward the capital projects they think their department needs, and they probably are asking that they be done sooner rather than later. I'm sure that's part of the process. Nevertheless, it's worth mentioning that the capital model that you all adopted totals $582.6 million, not the 563, which is in the paragraph at the top of page 5. That's an error. The arithmetic total of 5 years is 582.6. So the 400 is about 30% less than that. That capital model is not just a number in the sky like the 400 perhaps is. It lists out department by department, identifies the individual projects. Those projects were put forward. Ben Branyon massaged them and laid them out for them to appear in particular years and are put forward in that form through the first selectman, and we adopted it in that form. I think one should be cognizant of the substantial 30% difference between the model that you all adopted 6 months ago and the model that you're prognosticating in the guidelines that you're asking everybody to adopt tonight.
Thank you. Are we ready to vote? Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to make one comment to what Ms. Fesliotis said, and I'm going to use numbers from a slightly earlier open capital report, but I believe about half of the open appropriations are the projects that were approved on July 1. So it's not like the departments have had significant time to implement those projects and work them down. Yes, it is workload that they have. We probably have about, we have double that amount in open capital from prior years, but we've also heard with supply chain issues, capital projects are taking longer to implement, not because our staff is not able to handle it, it's because we're waiting for things. So I just wanted to add that context.
Thank you.
Can I just also just say that, I mean, the bottom line is, though, we have plenty of projects that are still in the queue that have not been completed. And the other comment that I'd just like to make is capital models are just that, models, and they certainly can change with changing times, and certainly it's a point of discussion that needs to be had with the town officials.
Laura?
Yeah, I just hope that this is really treated as a guideline and not as a cap. I mean, let's be honest, I think 400 million is probably too low, 582.6 million is probably too high. We know there's some projects that are not reflected in our capital plan having to do with climate resiliency. But I would hate for the departments to receive the message that you can only come in at under the cap, because I want to hear about what maintenance projects may not be being done, what's being deferred. We talked about this a little bit in Budget Committee. Are there considerations for projects that are to be funded by grants or reimbursement programs or private-public partnerships? So I really want to, I mean, last year, let's face it, we had a guideline of 70 million and the first selectman's budget was in the $95 million range. Maybe we don't want to see that wide of a discrepancy, but I want to see the projects that were vetted through the departments. I do trust that between our finance staff and our town administrator and the department heads, they're not just putting in projects willy-nilly. There's a thought process behind them. And I don't want to not have those conversations because of this number. So I do hope, message received, that it's in the guidelines, but I hope this one in particular is treated more as a guideline than as a cap. Thanks.
Yes, I mean, just one suggestion I would make on that. This is a new process. I think over time it will be a very beneficial process, but as I talked to Ben today, I go, you probably feel like the dog that caught the bus, right, for Ben, right? Because, Ben's volunteered to take on this project to try to, rationalize the 5-year plan. And it'll obviously be a tough process, but I certainly would encourage, members or perhaps the Budget Committee to, maybe sit down with him and understand how he's going to process this number. And I agree with you. I mean, we should have a sense of, what projects are out there. But, when we're putting together a 5-year plan, I think there's got to be just a bit more discipline to it than that. But I would encourage that conversation. Let's see how Ben and Fred process this information, and let's see what, whether it gets done again next year. Can we proceed to a vote?
Harry, I'll start with you. This is the Leslie Moriarty's amendment to raise the 5-year capital from 400 to 475.
I vote no.
Laura?
Yes.
Karen?
No.
David?
Yes.
I'm a no. Dan? No. Leslie Tarkington?
No.
Leslie Moriarty?
Yes.
Jeff Raymer?
Yes.
Bill
No.
Drake?
Yes.
Yes.
So motion fails, 6-6.
Leslie, you have one last motion?
One more area, and if you can, let me give a little background before I get to it to see how we should handle this. This has to do with the challenge budget and its calculation. And so I'm struggling a little bit with the presentation and the expectation that this board will have for the divisions. I would like to understand what their budget would be on a continuation basis and the budget with this challenge. So to understand what they are changing in their operations to meet this less than rollover continuation level services budget that we have calculated. And so that's one area that I'd like to talk about. The second being, and I will make a motion at the end of this, is given, as I mentioned in my comments earlier in the meeting, given that we had a 0% budget increase in fiscal '21, and that we have much higher inflation now, and that we have not always fully appropriated the budget requests from the departments and the schools, I think we're at 1.4% overall decrease, right? Or is it higher than that? I think 1.4% decrease for the challenge budget. I'm thinking, and I know I didn't introduce it to the Budget Committee, but maybe a 1% decrease is a more appropriate number to implement. That does create an additional 1.3 million, I think it is, number, 1.26 that needs to be funded that drops to the bottom line. And then the third area that I'm thinking about is that right now, the way the challenge is implemented in here, the impact on the town is at 1.21% reduction, and the schools is at 1.53% reductions. And I believe the towns and the schools should be treated equally. They're different operations, there's different challenges, et cetera, but the fact that the schools' personnel have a higher wage rate, I don't know if that's a good rationale for having them have a higher target in terms of a challenge budget that you want to see the results of. So those are the issues I'm trying to think about, the best way to address, the best order to do these things. Let me first start with modifying the challenge budget to be a 1% reduction in operating expenses. That's the First Amendment.
Second.
I did.
Any other discussion? Okay. I think we can take that to a vote.
Stephen, I'll start with you.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
I'm a no. David?
Yes.
Karen?
No.
Laura?
Yes.
No.
Okay, the motion fails, 6-6.
Okay, so the next amendment would be the allocation of the 1.4% reduction to be equally shared by the town and the Board of Education. And I think that results in about $350,000 increase to the, increase to the reduction for the Board of Ed, and it moves over to the town side.
Okay. And a second on that?
Seconded.
Okay, Jeff. Any additional discussion? Okay. Nisha, do you want to?
Oh, actually, I do have a
of course,
question.
of course.
So I did listen to some of the, this morning's meeting, but it's not clear to me why there is that discrepancy. Is it solely because the teacher's contract came in at a much higher wage increase? And to me, it seems like they're sort of being penalized for that.
Well, I think, no, fair question. Like anything like this, there's different elements to it. I think the first thing I would say is that it is in part due to the fact that their increase is significantly higher than the towns. So the 1%, I'm sorry, the 1.2% for the town and the 1.5% for the Board of Ed, although the decrease from the challenge is bigger to the Board of Ed than the town on a percentage basis, you know, at the end of the day, that the Board of Ed is still getting an operating increase of 2.9, while the town is getting a 2.0. And with benefits, it's more like 3.5 to 3.1. So, I mean, is there perfect science to it? No, but I would not characterize this as primarily keyed off of the wage structure, because remember, the 4.36% for the schools on the teachers is also offset somewhat by the 1.5 million step because of the new position. So I think it's just more a function of the fact that the Board of Ed was having an overall bigger increase anyway. And they ended up with a 50% higher increase. Thank you, Miriam.
Can I make a quick comment on that?
Yes.
I think not really more of a year-on-year, but just more of a macro positioning and I made this point this morning, that, over the last, whether it's over the last 5 years or the last decade, the population of our town has, is either flat or up a couple percentage points, and our operating budget has reflected that. Our enrollment on our schools, as you know, has come down about 6% in the last 5 years, and our operating budget has gone, depending on if you include benefits or not, 25%. So I think it's, it's not always fair to say, well, you're cutting this X percent, we got to cut this X percent. We got to look at it either as, the dollar we spend per citizen in the case of the town, or the dollar we spend in terms of student. So again, not really a year on year, but looking at it over a longer time period, I think it's not always apples to apples, so.
Thank you. Can you go to a vote?
And I'll start with Harry.
No.
Laura.
Abstain.
No.
Yes.
I'm a no.
I'm a no.
I'm a no.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
I think we have 5-6-1, so the motion
Correct.
fails.
Okay.
And I believe my last point of wanting to know what changes are being implemented in order to achieve the challenge, I believe Ms. Cruiser has language to address that point, so I'll stop here.
Okay. Thanks, Leslie. Miriam?
So that dovetails nicely to the proposed language amendments. And like I said, it really is not only to add meat to the bones, but I think it's to address the discussion we were having previously between Ms. Erickson and Mr. Ozmir. You added to it too, which is exactly, how do you get to not only the operating budgets that we're signaling here, but also this new 5-year capital plan. So my first amendment, my first proposed change would be under the bullet point, page 2, under the bullet point that says the challenge. So this third sentence reads, the departments can determine how it achieves the budget, e.g. staffing, reducing the number of facilities, or programs reducing the hours of operations. The sentence I'd like to include after is, the departments will explicitly report how that challenge budget will be achieved in each of their budget presentations. So very explicitly talking about what are you cutting? How did you get here? And not a discussion, high level, but, and whether even a template, and I'm happy to create one, but whether even a template needs to be formulated in order for them to have that very open and honest discussion, not only with us, but with the public.
Can you just repeat that one more time?
Of course. The departments will explicitly report how that challenge budget will be achieved in each of their budget presentations.
I'll second that.
I would just mention one thing. It is, of course, possible that a decision could be made at a leadership level at either the schools or the first selectman, where there may be a department, I don't know, pick a town department where they're not actually doing much of anything. It may just be, I don't know how that gets handled, but I just want to throw that out.
They can say that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, if it's all good news, I mean, and if this is easygoing, if they can find efficiencies, if it's all efficiencies, this is a fantastic conversation, right?
Any other discussion on that? Leslie?
just add that one of the reasons why, basically, as you go through the operating accounts, both the salaries and the remainder of the 100s to the 800s, we did budget the salaries at, what actual contracted rates or where they weren't actually contracted, advised by our labor negotiator, and working with Roland, and the rest of the 200, the rest of the 200s to the 800s, accordingly at the inflation rate, is because there may be things that could be done at a much higher level rather than down to the department level. So this is an opportunity to, look at this more holistically and, to step back and see, what else can be done. And, I think that, the sentence that was, added about a facility utilization study could lead to such things, which really wouldn't impact. I mean, one of the other items in here, Miriam, is that we basically said, what we're trying to avoid is what happened to us in the Great Recession, and then also, when COVID hit, where all of a sudden there are major impacts and everyone's impacted, and it's a rather difficult situation for all. So, the budget guidelines also say elsewhere that if there's a reduction, in headcount, it's only by attrition. There isn't any major programs here to do this. So, this is really a leadership challenge, as our chair has said, rather than necessarily by the department. I mean, clearly, we expect the departments to work within the guideline kind of format, but it's a leadership challenge.
So I've got personally no objections to the language. I don't know if we want to have more discussion or if, oh, yes, Karen,
Can
of
I,
course.
instead of, I guess, are we explicitly reporting, or should we say the department should be prepared to discuss how that challenge budget will be achieved?
What I'm envisioning is actually something that's on paper, right? That I think they all decide to come before us with their different presentations, but what I'd rather not have is just a kind of informal discussion rattling off some very high-level things. We have numbers that say 1.53 and 1.21. Those are very specific, so let's get into specifics. I'd like to see it on paper.
I guess I'm just questioning what you.
Written report.
What you expect to see on paper. I'm not really clear about the explicitly report then.
Well, I guess a service level budget and where they're getting to, where they're meeting the challenge.
Miriam, can I ask a follow-up on that? I was just going to ask something similar as to, are you hoping that in specifically asking it this way, you'd want to see, for example, if I was kind of, I'm just putting a different hat on, I'd expect departments to come and say, listen, these are things I can do to improve my process. This is technology I can implement. These are some changes I can make to, help meet this challenge. But I would expect some departments would be much tougher because they're more people intensive and less process oriented. So I would, not expect, for example, every department to have a flat out 1.2. Maybe some do 3, maybe some do nothing. Right, and I would be okay with that, but that would be my hopes in having this language, not necessarily everyone coming with their sob story and saying, oh, I got to cut this guy and I can't do it. So,
No, and there will be a give and take, right? And Leslie Tarkington is absolutely right. This comes from the top. So, I'm sure Mr. Brannion's listening to this. It would start with their presentation of if there's a high level trend that you're seeing, lay that out too.
Yeah, if I could. Just to move this along, I think this is a very logical and reasonable suggestion that Miriam is making. And I think that if Dan said he's going to support it, let's call the vote and move forward.
Okay, I'll start with you. Miriam, do you want to read your language one more time? So this will be Miriam's amendment to change the language to...
The departments, and this is after hours of operations, within the bullet point, this is the challenge. The departments will explicitly report how that challenge budget will be achieved in each of their budget presentations.
Harry, I'll start with you. I'm sorry, yeah, this is, we're voting
vote
on
yes.
Miriam's amendment. Laura?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Dan?
Yes.
Leslie
Yes.
Tarkington? Leslie Moriarty?
Yes.
Jeff Raymer?
Yes.
Miriam?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a 12-0, so that passes.
I have another one, since I'm on a roll. In the same vein, the last sentence of that same section that says, and increases the capital tax levy by 1.5 million. I propose the following. The departments will explicitly report which projected fiscal year 23 capital items have been removed from the proposed fiscal year 24 budget, and whether those projects have been deleted or to which fiscal year they have been deferred.
Could you repeat that again?
Sure.
Please, I'm sorry.
So, and it's
It's
based
lengthy.
on, so I'll read the full sentence beforehand, because that adds the context. The challenge budget increases capital projects to 100 million from the current year budget of 65.2 million. However, less than projected in the fiscal year 23 15-year plan. It increases the capital tax levy by 1.5 million. So what I proposed, and again, anyone please help if the language can be clearer, the departments will explicitly report which projected capital projects in the fiscal year 23 15-year plan have been removed from the proposed fiscal year 24 budget, and whether those projected, those have been deleted or to which fiscal year they are being deferred. So I essentially, let's, to the point that you were discussing, there was a very large number that we pushed over into fiscal year 24. The public has seen that to some extent or another, right? There are certain things that people are looking forward to. What are those, which of those are being cut explicitly, and where are they going?
Okay, so thank you, Miriam. On this one, I'm not as comfortable, and the reason being is I think this is explicitly going to be done in the 5-year planning process by the first selectman and Ben Brannion. So when they deliver, the idea is instead of just delivering us a fiscal 24 plan, they're going to show us a 5-year plan, and that 5-year plan is going to be very clear, well, I hope so, is going to be very clear about what projects, they're going to have to move projects to somewhere in the 5-year, and then if they delete some, it's going to be there. So I support, it's a good question. I think it's something we need to know, but I actually think that is clearly going to be the result of the 5-year process, and I think that's at least what Ben said he's going to do. Now, it may be in this budget process that we find out that Ben does different things than what we expected him to do, and obviously I can't control what Ben and Fred do, but I believe that's exactly what we've asked for already. So I'm not comfortable supporting this at this moment, but that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Yeah. I concur with what you just said. It's really up to the first selectman to decide what projects he's going to present in his capital budget. And
What do they call that process that they're reviving? They used to do it 4 or 5 years ago. The what?
CIP.
CIP, right here.
CIP. Yeah, I kind of agree with you, Dan, that the CIP, inherent in the CIP, which I assume we all understand is going to be revived. So that is what the CIP process will be. It really belongs in the CIP process.
And the CIP process was particularly focused on the current fiscal year, but this would be a 5-year process.
But now we're going to do for the first time a 5-year CIP,
Right.
which is, as you pointed out, an enhancement that's a good one. So,
Can I make,
Of course.
so I think, David, you're making an assumption that there's a CIP process. Right now, it's just the first selectman who has the responsibility for developing the capital plan. We don't know how that's going to be done. And I think a modification, Miriam's just asking for probably a chart of all of the decisions being made, as opposed to having us visually compare the '23 budget versus the '24 15-year plan to see where things have moved. There's certainly a lot of projects, so I'm wondering whether a modification to Miriam's amendment, instead of saying the department, it really should be the first selectman.
That's a great suggestion. I'd be happy to amend my amendment.
I now second.
Leslie?
So I don't think that this particular motion or the objective of this should be necessary. I think we're trying out, it was the recommendations of people that, certainly didn't, well, I wasn't involved. But when you look at the charter and you look at section 21B, it is very clear that it's the first selectman's job to basically develop the goals and objectives and establish priorities. And it's very clear that these priorities are respect to recommended capital spending for all town agencies, and that it's necessary to develop a long-range capital spending plan. And I think part of this confusion and why we're trying to substitute things here is because it's been pushed down first to the budget committee level, which is the first line of defense, and then the full BET. So whether the 400 number is the right number or not, I really welcome this particular program, and I enthusiastically will do everything I can to make sure it works. So hopefully, I won't be sitting here next year when Miriam proposes it and I support it. So I'm supporting the $400 million. I know we are. No, it's capital. I mean, that's what you said here because I read but that's why I won't support it this time.
Okay, do we want to take a vote on this?
Well, let me take one last shot at this, because Leslie Moriarty makes a good point. I assume it's the view of this board that the CIP process is desirable. I assume that people have thought about that, but it's an assumption, as Leslie Moriarty noted. So supposing we were to say explicitly, we expect the first selectman conduct a 5-year CIP program to evaluate specific capital projects during the 5-year time horizon, because that would cover the essence of what Miriam was suggesting. And I think we want to be on record as saying, go ahead and do this. I think he's gonna. I really do, but I don't know that it's clear. It would be a real shame if you come up with a number and then it's the 400 million, whatever that is the number now, and that the first selectman doesn't act on that, and it sort of sits there as just a benchmark. So that would be something I would like to suggest, because I do think everyone agrees that that's a good thing to do. So that's my suggestion and a motion.
And Laura has her hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say, with or without Miriam's proposed language, with Leslie Moriarty's amendment in the guidelines, I think these are questions that the Budget Committee and other BET members ask anyway. We asked them last year, and I suspect we will do so again. To Mr. Weisbrod's point, I think that I don't want to be too prescriptive in how the first selectman and town administrator perform their job. I'm assuming that the budget guidelines, if they're not listening to this discussion, they're going to get the gist of it. They're going to get the written document. I think they have their marching orders. And I think we just need to let the process unfold.
But I'm making a motion if there's anyone who wants to second my motion. If not.
Well, I think we have to dispose of Miriam's. Unless she wants to.
I amend Miriam's motion if I can.
Okay, no.
Should we vote
Can we
on-
do a vote
yeah.
on Miriam's
Let's
motion?
vote on Miriam's. Okay, Harry, you're first.
Vote no.
Laura,
No.
Karen,
No.
David.
No.
I'm a no. Dan,
I am a no. I'm sorry. I just think we're going to already get it with the current process. Thank you.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
I think it's 4-8, so the motion fails.
So now I make my motion which I repeat, we expect the first selectman conduct a 5-year CIP program to evaluate specific capital projects during the 5-year time horizon. Do I have a second?
Stephen? Second.
I don't think we need discussion unless somebody is,
So you want to do a vote, Nisha?
Yep, just give me 1 second, just adding it in.
Can you repeat the sentence, David?
yes. We expect the first selectman conduct a 5-year CIP program to evaluate specific capital projects during the 5-year time horizon.
Can I take the vote? Stephen, I'll start with you.
Yes.
Miriam?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
I'm a no. David?
Yes.
Karen?
I'm going to say no at this point, Dave.
Laura?
No, with apologies to my caucus.
No.
Harry?
I can't even win my own.
So the motion fails 5-7.
Wait a second, Roland has a vote.
Still would fail.
He has two, actually, Roland has two
Still would
votes.
fail. Okay.
He didn't tell you, right? Okay. Okay.
That's it, maybe?
Yep, I think that's it for the amendments. Again, I want to thank everyone for offering the amendments and the discussion. So do we want to proceed to a vote and then allow people to make comments, or are there any additional comments before we take the vote?
But normally you make comments before the vote.
Okay, yeah, okay. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, that's what I meant, yeah. Okay. Okay. Oh, Jeff?
I mean, are you soliciting comments at this time? Yeah. Then I.
If there's comments, I'm soliciting them.
Yeah, I would like to offer comment. First of all, a parenthetical. It was a disappointment to me with all the time that all of us put in on this board, that there should be things as important as this guidelines and yet have it not be a truly collaborative process, and that's a disappointment to me. The chair commented at the outset that he and others have been working on these guidelines for weeks. It should be noted for the record that the first moment at which the text was available to anyone on our side of the aisle was one day before the Budget Committee meeting when it was sent to Mrs. Moriarty. She did share it with the rest of her caucus that day. But the first occasion in which the administration sent copies of the text to us was at 12:38 on the day of the hearing itself, the day of the meeting itself. That's not a collaboration. Section 1-225, it's the Freedom of Information Act, it's subsection C, requires there be a posting no later than 1 day before the meeting. So the text was sent to us at about the minimum time required by FOI for the posting of the meeting, and that's not collaboration. I hope going forward that there would be more collaboration. We would have spent less time tonight wordsmithing this document if the text of this document had been available. If people were disseminating the text and saying, these are the guidelines that are, this is a preliminary draft, let me have your comments, et cetera, a very common process. On the guidelines themselves, Jim Lash, for whom I have tremendous respect. He commented sagely, I thought, that budget is not just a process of trying to achieve a low mill rate. His words were that I'd like this also to be the kind of town in which I'd like to live. And I think that that's a good benchmark of what services and amenities we ought to be preserving. When you cut items, you're removing services, you're removing amenities, and it's hard for us to understand clearly what the community wants. In prior years, these guidelines would lay out a projection, not a commitment, but a projection of what a level services budget would seem to look like from the preliminary information known to us. And I think I wasn't present for it. That's my very point to you, of course. But I think the work that Roland did was to try and do that projection through the operating portion, at least, of the budget. There's no calculation made here, however, of what the budget would have gone up had it not been for the components in the challenge, the $4.425 million challenge. Let me say to you now, I mean, it would have gone up by a lot. If I add that $4.425 million back into the amount to be financed, that amount to be financed would be 4.8% larger than it was last year. That's a whopping number. Because we're working with a different grand list, the mill rate wouldn't have gone up by quite that much, but the mill rate would have gone up by 4.08%, not the 2.99 that was cleverly crafted to try and get under the 3%. The point is made to us, no, it's only a challenge budget. This is not truly the guidelines. That's not how it's being put to the departments. But as I look at page 2, in a box score nearest the top on page 2, it's set out there, key fiscal year 24 budget guidelines for the departments in bold print. And it says for the town departments, 2.0% increase. For the school department operating costs, 2.9% increase. Fiscal year capital paren general fund, 100 million. Boy, those are guidelines. You can call them challenges if you like, but they're guidelines, and I can hear the words this spring. We'll be asking departments, how come you came in above guidelines, et cetera? This, in its application, becomes a cap. What's the impact of it? Well, I mean, by my rough arithmetic, the challenge reductions on the town side sound to me like more or less 10 full-time positions being eliminated. On the school side, it's the equivalent, I believe, of about 17 certified positions and about 6 support positions. You don't delete 17 teachers and 6 support people without there being some impact. There's impacts that go beyond that. For one thing, I think unrealistically, it's ridiculous for us to be doing a projection here today in which we're assuming that inflation in 2024 is going to be at 2.3%. I hope our inflation in 2024 is going to be, fiscal year 24 is going to be 2.3%, but I don't think that's a reality. For years, we held these public hearings, and the public came to us and said to us that of extreme importance to them is fields. And we spent quite a bit of money. I think it was $150,000, but I'm not sure I have that number right. And we did a field study. Its implementation under this kind of a budget, 0. We had a trying, painful conversation about whether to develop a firehouse in Northwest. A process was embarked upon to bring in an outside professional, the Matrix, to do a study on fire response, and they recommended development at Round Hill, or perhaps development of even a second firehouse. The implementation under this budget, 0. It makes an assumption of $67.5 million on Central Middle School and lays it out with a rigidity that in my comments earlier, I protested to you that don't do that rigidity. That's not the way in which you embark on a conversation. It's as painful to the school board as their suggestion to you of $85.5 million. You're thwarting the opportunity for a healthy dialogue. For 4 years, we will not have replaced a single fire truck when we used to replace 1 fire truck each year. We have a ladder truck, I'm told, that now is over 25 years old, and under the normal standards, it ought to be a fire truck that is pulled off the line by national standards. It is too old to be serviceable, and yet that's our reliance. We have a fire truck out of commission because of chemicals that were introduced into its tanks. It won't be back online until at least December, maybe longer. We make a mistake that we just assume that you can delete fire trucks. We make a mistake when you assume that just because the Parks and Rec says they need 5 pickup trucks, it should be reduced to 4. All that happens when you do that is when they need 4, they ask for 5 so that they can have the reduction down to the 4 that they needed in the first place. You've been failing to ask the questions in the Budget Committee process that you should have been asking to really understand how many pickup trucks were needed. At $100 million total of capital in the first year, that leaves only $75 million per year for the remaining 4 years if you're going to honor the $400 million cap. At $75 million figures, although you haven't said the words, I don't think you're doing a renovation of Old Greenwich. I don't think you're doing a renovation of Julian Curtis. I don't think you're doing a renovation of Riverside. You're pushing these out for further years. You haven't said those words. Matter of fact, you took the capital plan that you approved last April, and you prefer not to identify any of those projects that you're not doing. You're just saying, cut the numbers. The numbers need to be smaller. I don't see remaining adequate funds for proper maintenance once you've done Central Middle School. And I don't care whether Central Middle School is being done at 67 or at 120. I'm not seeing adequate funds for maintenance. We've made that mistake before. It's a mistake to cinch capital funds down so low that you force the departments not to do proper maintenance. I pointed out to you that although you're talking about $400 million for your 5 years of capital projects, that's 30% less than the 582.6 that you said last April. We had capital tax levy increases every year of $3 million. The logic of that was that those were figures that were necessary to be amortizing down the debt to stay within our debt policy and to stay within the statutory requirement that you not be financing the servicing of your debt. If you work your numbers at $1.5 million, I think you're going to find that you not only can't meet your debt policies, you won't be able to, in a relatively few number of years, even meet the statutory requirements that are imposed on you by the Connecticut General Statutes. We've had no increase in the fundings to the schools for their increasing SPED costs. By that I mean their special education costs and the cost of out-of-district settlements and tuitions. And that's not accounted for in this budget either. On the contrary, you're cutting their operating budget. Bus contracts have been increasing. The most recent increase was 12%. There's no provision in the funding for schools to be accommodating that. We've had conversations here about a temporary ice rink and certainly about a rehabilitation of the Hamel rink. My colleague to my left, Bill Drake, has certainly spent countless hours on it. I'm not seeing where in this budget we're going to be doing Hamel renovation, let alone a temporary ice rink. I'm not seeing in this budget how we step forward to begin to protect the town assets against storms and sea level rise, something which we've cut from the budget for each of the last 2 years. Our Department of Public Works has said that if you want to maintain your paving at the same level that it is today, you should be spending $4.5 to $5 million. But for the last 2 years, you've been spending $3.5 million. I'm not seeing increases being allowed for in the budget that you're talking about in your guidelines today. The remediation at Western Middle School that we all nod our heads and say absolutely positively when we get the final word from the Department of Environmental Protection that we'll be approving it, and we've been pegging a number of about $8.5 million, and yet saying that we've been hearing from others that it might be $12 or $13 million. I'm not seeing those dollars in this budget either. Are we not? We did not keep our word when we said that absolutely positively we'll be taking care of Western Middle School. We anticipate a negative fund balance at Nathaniel Witherell, yet earlier today, we were talking about possible 7 figures of numbers which may be untenable from the standpoint of the collectability of our receivables. The negative fund balance that we need to be writing off may be a greater number. But in your budget here, you have no provision for that, even though the stark reality of what's happening at Nathaniel Witherell has been looking you in the face. You choose not to accommodate it. You're talking about a budget that I don't think, budget guidelines that I don't think is a workable budget. And I think it's a request for difficulty later. I don't think it's the development of a community that has services and amenities, which is the place in which I hope to live. Sorry about my failing voice, but those are my remarks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jeff. David?
Well, I'm not going to go on quite as long as my colleague just did, but I do share his concerns, and I must express them here. This budget exercise done in the dark of night without any transparency at all, any input until just a day before it was first presented to the Budget Committee, is a tremendous disappointment to me personally. the lack of collaboration and engagement of others on this board is shocking, to be honest. Really, it is. This budget is thoughtless, is the word I would use. It's plain and simple. It is a spreadsheet exercise, coming up with an artificial number, 2.99%, to please some constituency here that feels that they have to come up with a solution on whatever that mill rate increase is. It puts the cart before the horse. The challenge that we call a challenge, it's stated that nobody wants to have a process where the cuts are made by the BET. But when you put in a challenge, it does just that. It comes in and says, we want 2.99%, and have a nice day. We don't really care what you do, how you do it, what it is, it boils down to services that will be eliminated. And so we'll hear this during the budget process, that there will be specific services that will have to be eliminated. Now, maybe some of those services should be eliminated, but without knowing the impact of that, it's just a number that's just a finger in the air with no thought as to what that might be. We talk about closing schools, or my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about that. That may be necessary, but where's the engagement with the community to say, what's the savings that you'd have? What school would you close? What would it mean? What would it look like? We talk about whatever impact we may have on outsourcing of Nathaniel Witherell, but where's the analytics? Where are the analytics that show what that savings would be and how it would be seen in terms of numbers? That's budgeting, not a finger in the air with a spreadsheet that comes up artificially with a number. The capital tax levy increase at 1.5 million, which is horrendously low, as I think my colleague just pointed out, will almost certainly result in violations of, if we don't add to the capital tax levy, if you have a modified pay-as-you-go, there's a key word, pay. If you don't increase the capital tax levy, you can't do it, you can't pay it, and you'll find it triggers statutory violations down the road. And of course, at $400 million over 5 years, you're cutting out, a significant amount of the projects that are on the agenda. And I think they've been enumerated. There won't be Dorothy Hamill. There won't be the field remediation. There won't be an Old Granite School. There certainly won't be a fire station in the Northwest, and all the things that have been cited already. So look, we live in challenging times, and we do need to have fiscal responsibility. There is not an unlimited amount of funds that can be provided. Everyone gets that. Fiscal constraints are essential, but for heaven's sakes, it has to be done thoughtfully, with engagement of the community, with collaboration. This is not that kind of guideline.
Laura?
Thank you. There are a couple of key points in this guideline document which do make me uncomfortable, and I am not going to support it as such. But I do want to be fair, because we're at the starting gate here of a months-long process. And with respect to how the document comes together and the collaboration, there can't be a lot of back and forth and emails and whatnot, because that's conducting a meeting, and we can't really do that. We have to be in public session. So my understanding, bear in mind, I am in my first term on the Budget Committee. I do believe that our caucus chair, the chair of the Budget Committee, the chair of the BET, has had many meetings, consultations, conversations with input from our budget director and our comptroller. So I do want to be fair that the process may be flawed, and perhaps there's a better way to redesign it, but under the current system, I think it is what it is, and we just have to deal with it. I do want to also be fair and say that there was a document that we discussed last Wednesday specifically at the Budget Committee, which is different than the document that we discussed today, both this morning and this evening. So there was movement, there was additional language provided. We talked about a facilities utilization plan. We talked about, an update on special ed. So there were accommodations made. And I do want to be fair and acknowledge and respect that, because this does have to be a collaboration. I think the public expects us to try and work together. We are not always going to agree, but at the end of the day, it is our charge as elected officials to do the best we can. And I do want to, again, acknowledge the work that has gone into this. I think we have some very key areas of division, and I hope that we can recognize that what David and Jeff were talking about in terms of trade-offs, what's going to get done, what's not going to get done. I don't want to make the assumption personally that my colleagues across the aisle don't support Old Greenwich School. I don't think that's the case. I think we're going to try and figure out a way to get that done. As always, and I think Mr. Lash always said, tell us what you need, and we'll try and get it to you. Maybe not in the timeline that you wish for it to be, but if it makes sense and we can do it financially, we'll do it, right? So I hope that mentality hasn't gone away from this board over the years. Again, just to summarize, I can't support this for a couple of very key points, but overall, it's a new day, it's a new budget cycle, and I do think in the spirit of cooperation, I really want to start off on a better foot. The last 3 years have been extremely challenging. Yet again, we have another challenge. Some call it an opportunity. It's a little bit of both. And we'll see what develops. I just hope that we get the information, a complete picture, not just at the end of the day, how do we get to a 2.99% increase in the mill rate, or may or may not be the right number. Typically in the past, there's been a range. That's not the case in this document. But hopefully our discussions will give us a sense that there is middle ground to be had on some of these key areas of disagreement, shall we say. Thank you.
Thank you. Leslie?
So, actually, I would like to, thank Dan and Leslie in particular, both of whom I've been working with and talking with over a period of time. It's been a particularly difficult year in terms of getting the numbers. We're operating in an inflationary environment, not knowing whether we're going to have a recession. I think that Roland is absolutely amazing with his commitment to the town and to this board. And Pete Minarski is, a stalwart in terms of his experience and knowledge. So, I just want to thank everyone. I hope I tend to be a person who wants to work with the team, and I've tried my best, given the time frame. Quite frankly, I would have pushed off this date for the approval, but I think my colleagues wanted to make sure it got done in October. I think that this push was rather difficult. And quite frankly, I think that even in many of Jeff's comments, he's been involved in many of those decisions too, and we've worked together when he was a member of the Budget Committee. I think we are fortunate with this budget in that we already have a larger commitment from our assessor's office in terms of the growth of the grand list. That will help the townspeople. But I think in terms of talking about all these things, we have to remember that, as I think Karen pointed out earlier, so many of our residents actually can't afford everything. They're deciding, okay, this is how much money I have. How am I going to prioritize? How am I going to spend my money? My gas bills are going up, my heating bills going up. In the summertime, their electricity will go up, and they'll be feeling it, I guess, if they have an electric car. But so many of us, it's trying to balance delivering excellent services, and the way this is structured, it shouldn't cut the departments back, but we need some leadership to help us with areas that perhaps can help meet this. And, quite frankly, rather than really publicly talking about things, I would rather have people think about this and present the opportunities that they can find. And hopefully we'll all work collaboratively together. I mean, quite frankly, we have really 3 budget committee meetings coming up before we start the budget season. So it would be constructive if we use those sessions, our new business sessions, to begin to address some of these issues that will be coming up in the budget cycle rather than waiting to that time. So I would also like to thank Laura for her kind comments, and I look forward to working with Leslie and Nisha and Laura during this budget cycle. So, we all need to work together, and in order to make this work, we really are very dependent on our BET committees. They are our basic framework, and this can, working together in this kind of environment, we're going to be very dependent on their contributions to making this work. And so, anyway, I look forward to working with all.
Nisha, are we ready for a vote?
Sure. Okay, so this, we are voting on to approve the budget guidelines
As amended.
As amended. Did we make a motion?
Yes, the motion was made, yeah.
There was, okay.
Okay.
All right, Harry,
I'm a yes.
Laura,
No?
Karen,
Yes.
David,
No.
I'm a yes. Dan,
Yes.
Leslie?
Yes.
Pennington, Leslie Moriarty,
No.
Jeff Framer,
No.
Yes.
No.
No.
so it's 6-6.
Made the motion second.
Oh, it was
I made the
Leslie
motion.
Tarkington seconded. Well, this was the way. Leslie Tarkington, Karen Pastriotis. And that was, it's 7:26 for the record.
Okay, the original motion. Got it.
So I will cast the chairman's tie-breaking vote. The guidelines pass 7-6.
I move that we adjourn.
Well, there's a few other items.
The minute.
No.
Yeah, no, we're going to have a 40-minute chair report. Okay, so they'll I can figure that out. Okay, so there will not, I'm not going to make a chair report today.
Can I?
One of these days, though, I'm going to make one, okay?
Mr. Chairman, I have an item of new business I'd like to propose. It's very brief. I would like to propose that the chairman give consideration to a process by which we can open a dialogue with the Board of Education and Schools Administration regarding the parameters of Central Middle School. I don't know if it's a joint meeting of the boards, but more likely perhaps a joint committee to initiate some conversations in which we're communicating our concerns about the budget they're proposing, in which they're expressing to us the reasons for them to believe that they have parameters of need. But I feel like what's missing here is a dialogue back and forth between finance and schools. It's not a formal motion, it's merely a request.
Understood. We had that discussion today, and I will be, taking that discussion up with the caucus leader, and we'll figure out a good process to do that.
Well, I was thinking if, the building committee for Central meets every Tuesday morning, I'm happy, and I plan to discuss how the BET voted today. So I think perhaps we can even have the building committee initiate that discussion back to the Board of Ed to kind of.
It's really not their role.
Okay, we'll talk about it. Motion to accept the minutes?
I don't think there was.
Dan, I don't want to suggest you do a lengthy chair report, but you may just want to report for the public the nominees to the JC and OG Building Committee.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Yep. We have a lot of building committees. Let's see. Harry Fisher is on the Old Greenwich Building, on the JC Building Committee, so we thank him for his service. We have Stephen Selps on the Old Greenwich Building Committee, so we thank him for his service. I would also just mention that the Havemeyer Committee, that's a first selectmen's committee to, look at that project and try to advance it. Andy Deuce is going to be serving as chairman, and we had previously designated Bill Drake, and Miriam Cruiser will be on that committee. So we'll certainly look forward to their work and updates. Motion to accept the minutes?
Approve the minutes.
Approve the minutes, I'm sorry. Discussion? Okay, those are accepted by unanimous consent. And can we have a motion to adjourn?
I move.
Oh, David and Harry, okay. Unanimous consent? This motion, this meeting is adjourned at 9:29.
Okay, well, all right. Did a good job.